Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. Hi, my name's Sarah, and I live in a small town in New England, USA. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. But, as much as I want to experience it, it just doesn't seem to want anything to do with me. Maybe I just don't have that third eye some people talk about. My husband, Jake, on the other hand, is a completely different story. His family hails from rural Maine, with deep roots in French, Irish, and Native American heritage. Paranormal experiences seem to run through his family like a dark thread, stretching back generations. His grandmother, who passed away a few years ago, was known to be a gifted medium, as were many of his relatives. Jake's mom didn't inherit this ability, but Jake has seen spirits for as long as he can remember. Though some of his encounters have been unsettling, they've never brought him harm. Even now, he says he often sees a dark, shadowy figure following him. A presence he believes to be the spirit of his late father. But that's another story for another time. Today, I want to share two of the most memorable encounters Jake has had, with his permission, of course. The first incident took place about a decade ago at the home of Jake's ex-girlfriend. It was a modest house, built in the 1960s, a simple, two-story, Cape Cod-style home. Nothing about it seemed out of the ordinary, aside from the slight mustiness of the air inside, like an old place that had seen a few too many winters. Like most homes of this kind, it had a narrow wooden staircase leading down to a cramped basement, mostly used for storage, but always eerily quiet. One evening, Jake was helping his ex with her car. As someone who's always been handy with tools, he left a set in the basement the night before and needed to grab them. As he started down the stairs, something completely unexpected happened. Without warning, a dark, shadowy figure of a man pushed past him on the staircase, rushing ahead and knocking Jake into the wall. It wasn't just a chill or a flash of light. It was as if the shadow had real physical force. Most people might have panicked or scrambled back up the stairs, but not Jake. He's not the type to back down from a challenge, even from something supernatural. Without thinking, he stood his ground, clenched his fists, and shouted, "Come here." The shadow paused at the bottom of the stairs and turned toward him. Though it had no face or any distinct features, Jake could feel its presence, its gaze locking onto him. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure bolted through the wall and vanished. Jake, being Jake, shrugged it off, grabbed his tools, and headed back upstairs. When he told his ex about her rude ghost, she was stunned. She had lived in that house her whole life and had never experienced anything paranormal. The second story happened when Jake was about 14 years old. His family would spend their summers at a trailer park just outside of town, and nearby there was an old, abandoned house. The place had always intrigued him. One summer day, Jake and his friend Matt decided to explore it. The house was in terrible shape, dusty, rotting, and falling apart. They carefully made their way through the rooms until they reached the attic. But as Jake stepped forward, the old floor gave way beneath him. He plunged through the attic floor, then down to the floors below, all the way to the basement. Miraculously, he wasn't seriously hurt, just some bruises and scrapes. As he sat up, trying to make sense of what had happened, he saw someone standing nearby. But it wasn't Matt. It was a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothes, like something from the early 1900s. She stood there, watching him, her eyes calm but knowing. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft yet commanding. Jake, still shaken, managed to tell her he was fine. She didn't seem angry, but there was something unsettling in her tone when she spoke again. "Good," she said. "Now get out of my house." Jake didn't need to be told twice. He found Matt, and they hurried out of there. They never went back to that house again. These are just two of the many strange experiences Jake has had over the years. As for me, I may not have my own paranormal tales, but I'm grateful that he's willing to share his with me. I promise these stories are true. They come straight from someone who's lived through them. Maybe one day I'll have my own supernatural experience to share, but until then, I'll just keep listening, reading, and wondering. What about you? Have you ever had an experience like this? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Last summer, my boyfriend and I decided to take our 3 dogs camping in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. We had picked a secluded spot just outside of Pine Ridge, California, a place we'd visited before. Pine Ridge is a quiet town, steeped in local history, especially from the Gold Rush era. It's surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills, making it the perfect place to unwind, away from the hustle of everyday life. We had camped there in the past with our kids and had always loved the peaceful atmosphere, so we were eager to return. The drive up to the campsite took about 30 minutes, mostly along a narrow gravel road that wound its way through thick trees. It was a beautiful route, but one that felt a little intimidating at times, especially with steep drops to the side. Definitely not a road you'd want to navigate after dark. The campground itself sat near a historic stone bridge, built in the early 1800s, and not far from a small cave-like tunnel, originally carved by miners. These days, the road bypassed the tunnel, but you could still feel the old history clinging to the place. Normally, it's a busy spot. There aren't many campgrounds around, and people flock to this one for its serenity and free camping. But on this particular Saturday, when we arrived, the entire place was eerily empty. No one else was around. We were surprised, but also relieved. It was like the whole area was ours to enjoy, just us, the dogs, and the wild. We set up camp near a peculiar stone wall that had clearly been there for a long time. It was built with large, weathered river rocks, stacked neatly about waist high. It looked sturdy, and as we examined it, we saw a small plaque cemented into the top. This wall was built by George Hartman in memory of his beloved wife, Eleanor, 1923. I thought it was such a beautiful tribute. We spent the day hiking the nearby trails, fishing in the mountain streams, and simply soaking in the peaceful surroundings. That night, as we turned in, my boyfriend and I settled into the tent, while the dogs lay outside on their beds. Around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly, though I wasn't sure why. Feeling unusually alert, I decided to light a cigarette and opened the tent flap to let the smoke out into the cold night air. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw something, or someone, by the stone wall. It was the outline of a man bent down, picking up rocks and stacking them carefully onto the wall. He had a dog by his side, wagging its tail in excitement, watching him work. I glanced down at our dogs, expecting them to be on alert, but they were fast asleep, completely oblivious. There was no fear in me, just a deep sense of curiosity. The man didn't seem hurried or agitated. He was completely calm, as if time itself had stopped for him. He continued placing rocks one by one, a task that seemed endless. Then, without warning, he straightened up and looked toward me. His dog turned with him, still wagging its tail. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure of how to react. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, I smiled and gave him a small wave. To my surprise, he raised his arm and waved back, just as casually as if we were 2 strangers passing on a trail. After that, he turned back to his task, resuming his work on the wall with quiet determination. I watched for a few more moments, a strange sense of calm settling over me before I stubbed out my cigarette, closed the tent flap, and went back to sleep. The next morning, I woke early, curious to see if there were any signs of what I had seen. The man, the dog, anything. But when I stepped outside, there was nothing. No footprints, no disturbed rocks, no trace of the previous night's events. It was as if they had never been there. I knew, however, what I had witnessed. This wasn't a frightening ghost. There was no malevolent energy, just a quiet, almost a sacred presence. The man seemed gentle, dedicated, and perhaps even a little obsessed with finishing the work he'd started. It was almost as if he was still tending to that wall for his wife, even in the afterlife. Talk about true devotion. This is a true ghost story, and I know it's true because it happened to me not long ago. I've always been the skeptical type when it comes to the paranormal. My mind is grounded in facts, logic, and evidence. For most of my life, I believed there was always a reasonable explanation for anything unusual. Ghosts, goblins, and supernatural beings were as real to me as characters in a comic book. Entertaining, but not something to believe in. That all changed about 3 months ago. It was late August, sometime between 9 and 11 p.m. I remember this because it happened during my usual rounds as a night usher at the local movie theater where I work. It's a small, quiet theater in a small American town. It only has 3 screens, a restroom, and a little office upstairs. We mostly show indie films and occasional classics. The theater's been around since 1972, and it still has that retro feel, with shag carpeting and faded orange walls, the kind of decor that was considered groovy back in the day. Soon after I started working there, I heard an odd rumor among the staff. Apparently, an employee had taken his life in a locked stairwell near Theater 3 back in 1976. The stairwell doesn't see much traffic. It leads up to the office, but there are easier ways to get there. No one I worked with had ever been inside, and it was the kind of place no one liked to talk about. One evening, I was handling all the duties, box office, concessions, and ushering, since it was just me and my manager on shift. After the last movie let out, she called me over the walkie-talkie. A customer had complained about hearing noises behind the locked door to the stairwell, and she wanted me to check it out. She handed me the key, admitting she didn't want to go herself. She guessed it was just rats, but I could tell the idea of that stairwell made her uneasy. I remember rolling my eyes, dismissing it as another ghost story. I walked over to the stairwell without hesitation, unlocked the door, and swung it open. That's when I felt it. A sudden, icy draft hit me as if a window had been thrown wide open on a freezing winter night. I slammed the door shut and took a few steadying breaths. My pride wouldn't allow me to admit I was spooked, so I opened the door again, this time slower. The cold swept over me again, but this time it felt different, like it was trying to freeze me in place. I wanted to turn on the lights, leave, or just scream, but I couldn't move. And then it happened. The lights flickered on, and the door slammed shut behind me. I dropped to my knees and squeezed my eyes shut, but just before I did, I saw something at the top of the stairs. I froze, not able to look away. Time felt like it stood still. After what seemed like an eternity, I forced myself to reach for the door, but it wouldn't budge. My keys were stuck outside, locked out, with me inside. I realized I had no choice but to face whatever was in that stairwell. I opened my eyes, and there he was. If you've ever watched a horror movie or seen pictures of ghostly encounters, you might think you know what it's like to see a ghost. But nothing prepares you for standing face to face with one. He was pale, almost transparent, but somehow more real than any person I've ever seen. He looked young, but there was an overwhelming sadness and loneliness in his eyes. His appearance was gruesome, half of his skull missing, like a bullet had taken it. But somehow his sadness made my fear melt into something else, sympathy. I felt like I knew him, though I couldn't explain why. I managed to whisper, "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the ground, swaying his head back and forth. When he turned, I saw the full extent of the wound, and I flinched so violently I almost fell into the door. I think he noticed, and it seemed to anger him. His movement was sudden, and he rushed toward me. I've never known fear like that. Before I could react, he was standing inches from me, so close I could smell the stale air around him. His hand raised, as though he just wanted to touch me. And then, in an instant, he vanished. I heard my manager's voice crackling through the walkie-talkie, asking what was taking so long. I don't know how I didn't hear her earlier. The walkie was on the whole time. Somehow, I found my composure, retrieved my keys, and hurried out of there. I still work at the same theater, and I still check that stairwell every few days. I haven't seen him again. Maybe he's found peace, or maybe he's hiding somewhere else now. But I like to think that, in his own way, he came to terms with his past that night, just like I came to terms with the fact that ghosts are real. When I was 10 years old, I had an experience that I still can't forget. Now, at 27, it's been 17 years since I've shared this story with anyone outside of my family. Back then, my mom had a love for yard sales. Every Saturday morning, without fail, she would wake me up early to go with her. One weekend, some neighbors were having their annual sale, and a few other families in the neighborhood joined in too. As we wandered around, my mom spotted something before I did, a 3-foot porcelain doll. She bought it for me because I was into collecting dolls at the time. But this one was different, more beautiful than any doll I had ever owned. The doll had a kind of presence. She stood tall with dark, loose curls that framed a face so delicate and angelic it almost looked unreal. Her dress was an evening gown made of deep green velvet with lace trim. It was detailed, almost like something from an old fairy tale. I named her Sarah and spent the rest of the day proudly showing her off to my friends. I felt honored to add her to my collection. That night, I carefully placed Sarah on a shelf with my other dolls, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Sometime later, I woke up to the sound of singing, soft and high-pitched, like a lullaby a mother might sing to her child. It was calming, but I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. I sat up and turned on the light. The moment I did, the singing stopped. I glanced at the clock. 12:00 a.m. I sat there frozen, wondering if I had imagined it. After a moment, I turned the light back off and crawled back into bed. Almost immediately, the singing started again. This time, I was certain it was real. I threw the covers off, turned the light back on. But again, the singing stopped. This time, I knew exactly where the sound was coming from, the doll. I picked Sarah up, thinking maybe she had a speaker inside or some kind of mechanism. I undid the back of her dress, expecting to find a battery compartment or a switch, but there was nothing, no explanation. Fear crept over me, and I ran to my mom's room, shaking her awake to tell her what had happened. She dismissed it, saying I had imagined it, and sent me back to bed. That night, I left the light on, and the singing didn't return. The next day, I went to school, not mentioning it to anyone, afraid they'd laugh at me. But that night, it happened again. At exactly midnight, the lullaby started. This time, though, I wasn't as scared. I sat up and just listened. I can't remember the words anymore, no matter how hard I try, but the melody was soft, almost peaceful. After a few nights of this, I told my mom again. This time, I asked her to sleep in my room with me so she could hear it for herself. She reluctantly agreed, and that night she heard it too. The next morning, she took the doll outside and threw it in the trash, saying it must be possessed. But when I came home from school, the doll was back on my shelf. I asked my mom if she had changed her mind and brought it back inside. The look on her face said it all. She hadn't touched it. She asked my brothers if they had taken it out of the trash, but they swore they hadn't. When my dad came home, my mom told him everything. Without hesitation, he detached the doll's head, thinking it might help, and threw it back in the garbage. The next morning, on my way to school, I glanced at the trash can. The doll's head was peeking out from the top, its face exposed. A chill ran through me, and I quickened my pace to get away from it. When I came home that afternoon, I passed the garbage can again, and something made me stop and look back. The doll's eyes. They were following me. I froze, thinking I was imagining it, so I walked by again. But it wasn't my imagination. The eyes moved. I ran inside, shaking and in tears, and told my dad what I had seen. He immediately called the local priest, who came over and took the doll away. To this day, I don't know what became of Sarah or what kind of spirit was attached to her. I don't think it was trying to harm me. If anything, the singing felt calming, but it was still something I couldn't understand. After that, I stopped collecting dolls. Even now, I sometimes think about the lullaby, but I can never quite remember the melody or the words. It's like it's just out of reach, buried somewhere in my memory. This story stretches over several years, and to my knowledge, continues to this day. It revolves around the woods near my friend Ethan's house, located just outside the small town of Pine Ridge, near the dense Pine Creek Forest in Northern California. The northern part of California is still fairly rural, and Pine Creek Forest is thick with trees and steeped in local legends. The area has a long history, once inhabited by the Yurok tribe, and some of the rock formations in the forest are considered sacred by Native American groups. While this rich history adds an eerie layer to the setting, it's not directly related to what I'm about to share. Pine Ridge itself, however, is an odd place. Even the town's original settlers, the Carmichael family, have ties to dark local history. But let me get to the real story, the strange occurrences in Ethan's woods. The woods around Ethan's house have always felt off. There's a tension in the air, a feeling like you're being watched. Growing up, Ethan and his friends would camp out there at night, but they never truly felt at ease. Back then, they chalked it up to imagination. However, that feeling of unease lingered into high school and beyond, and it only grew stronger after we graduated in 1999. After graduation, we decided to have a party in the woods, at the old campsite near Ethan's house. I'd never been there before, so I'll try my best to describe it. Ethan's backyard stretched about 100 yards of open grass to the edge of the forest, where the trees grew thick and the air was heavy. From there, it was another 30 yards through the trees to the campsite. The site itself was in the middle of a strange patch of bamboo, something unusual for this part of California. A small creek ran quietly through the area as well. That night, we built a campfire, shared stories, and drank until about 2 a.m. It felt like any other night. Everything seemed perfectly normal. That is, until 2 weeks later, during a weekend getaway, when the unsettling truth began to surface. One night, which we later dubbed Fright Night, we scared ourselves half to death by talking about the strange things we'd heard about. The conversation eventually turned to ghosts, and that's when it all came out. Each of us had experienced something disturbing in those woods, something none of us could explain. And we all agreed on one thing: whatever was there, it wasn't friendly. My experience in the woods was subtle but deeply disturbing. I kept feeling like someone was standing next to me, someone tall and thin, like my friend Rob. You know how you can sense when someone is near, even without seeing them? But every time I turned to talk to Rob, he was across the campfire, nowhere near me. Later, as we left the woods, I felt another presence behind me, almost breathing down my neck. Thinking it was Alec, my shorter, stockier friend, I turned to speak to him, only to see he was 30 feet behind me. It left me shaken, like we were intruding on something we didn't understand. Over time, we pieced together the unsettling details. There were 3 distinct figures in the woods. 2 were short, muscular, and the third was tall and thin. They wore flowing white gowns, timeless, almost priestly, and strange headpieces. Their eyes glowed an eerie white. We had no idea who or what they were, but one thing was clear: they did not want us there. These figures seemed tied to that specific area of the woods. Nothing strange ever happened in Ethan's house, the yard, or other parts of the forest. But other bizarre things happened too. My friends reported seeing a white figure, the runner, darting between the woods and a neighbor's house about 200 yards away. Sometimes it would race from the trees to the house and disappear, while other times it would emerge from the house and slip back into the woods. While this may not sound as terrifying as some other stories, the fear was real for us. To this day, whenever I'm near those woods, I feel that same malevolent presence. Standing in Ethan's backyard at night, I can feel them watching. If I focus hard enough, I almost hear them, just on the edge of my awareness. It could be my mind playing tricks on me, but the sensation of being watched is undeniable. When I leave Ethan's place at night, I don't feel safe until I'm in my car and a few miles down the road. Some nights, the unease is slight. Other times, it's overwhelming, like they're reaching out for me. On those nights, I run to my car and speed off, still haunted by the sensation that something is chasing me. In recent years, the activity has seemed to quiet down, but that could just be because we visit less frequently. Ethan moved away, and we only gather there a few times a year. Still, I know they're still there, watching, waiting. This story takes me back to when I was 19 years old, staying at a beach house in the sleepy coastal town of Pine Lake, California. I was visiting a friend's beautiful house perched on a hill overlooking the fisherman's dock. The layout of the house is important to the story. It sat about 100 yards uphill from the main road, with the garden at road level and the house itself higher. The house had a balcony that wrapped around it, almost like a porch, and my room was right in the center of the house, between two others. One door connected my room to the living room, while the other led to my friend's bedroom. My bed was placed against the window, parallel to the balcony, and across from the bed was a vanity table with a 3-panel mirror. It was our second night there, around midnight, when I started to feel uneasy. Something just felt off. I was lying on my left side, facing the window, when I noticed the curtains moving slightly, as though a breeze had entered the room. But I knew the windows were closed. That's when I realized something was very wrong. I stayed perfectly still, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. Slowly, I turned my head to glance around the room. It wasn't completely dark. The streetlights outside cast a faint glow into the room. That's when I saw it. Reflected in the left panel of the mirror was a black shadow. It was large, humanoid, and moving. It shifted from the left mirror to the center and then to the right, each time appearing larger and taller, almost reaching the ceiling. I froze. The shadow wasn't just in the mirror. It was getting closer to me. I quickly turned back onto my side, facing the sheets, but I could feel its presence. It was heavy, oppressive, and pressing down on me. I screamed my friend's name, shaking violently as though trying to throw off its weight. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. My friend rushed into the room, panic in her eyes. I explained what had happened, and we checked the windows to make sure they were closed. They were. There was no way the shadow could have been a reflection from headlights or anything outside. The house was too high up on the hill. We decided to brush it off, hoping we were just tired and imagining things. A week later, I invited another friend to stay with me in the same room. That night, as I lay in bed, I started feeling a terrible itching sensation all over my body. At first, I thought it was from too much sun exposure earlier at the beach, but the itching became unbearable, so I decided to turn on the light and check the bed. What we saw terrified us. My bed was covered in ants, thousands of them. They were arranged in the shape of a body, exactly where I had been lying. What was even stranger was that there were no ants anywhere else in the room. They weren't crawling up from the floor or along the walls. They were only on the bed, as though they had simply materialized there. We had no explanation. The following weekend, my dad and boyfriend came to visit and stayed in a room at the end of the house. Months later, my dad admitted that neither of them had slept well during their stay. They heard noises, scratching and scurrying sounds coming from the attic and inside the closet. When they checked, there was nothing there. My dad didn't mention it at the time, knowing we were just 3 women alone in the house for the rest of the weekend. Over the years, more strange things happened at that house, some to me and others to my friends' relatives. None of us ever learned the history of the house or its previous owners. It was about 60 years old and had been part of a property exchange my friend's husband received as part of a business deal. Without any way to trace its past, we were left to wonder what had caused the unsettling events. I moved to the United States in 1995 and eventually lost track of the stories from the Pine Lake house. But to this day, I believe that whatever was in that house was evil, powerful, and full of bad energy. I'm convinced that if I were to return, it would still be waiting for me, ready to say, "Welcome home." This story spans generations and centers around my great-grandparents' plantation home in a quiet part of Louisiana. The house, known as Crescent Hollow, had a long and storied history before my family ever stepped foot inside. Built sometime in the mid-1800s, the home had witnessed war, loss, and countless lives passed through its creaking halls. My great-grandparents, Jacob and Leela Davis, moved in with their children in 1922, making it their home for over 4 decades. The history of Crescent Hollow was steeped in legend. During the Civil War, as Union soldiers marched through the area, the house miraculously survived unscathed, though it wasn't entirely spared. A cannonball had torn through the front, passing down the hallway, and left a hole in the back wall, large enough for a person to crawl through. The Johnson family, who lived there at the time, had sought shelter in the cellar, where, amidst the chaos, a child was born. John W. Johnson, the patriarch, was well known for his wealth, his love of fine cigars, and his connections to a major plantation just across the Mississippi River. Afterward, 2 more families lived in the home before Jacob and Leila Davis took ownership. In the 1970s, after my great-grandmother passed away at the age of 94, my father decided to buy the house. Renovations quickly began, but it didn't take long for the workers to realize the house wasn't entirely empty. One worker, while perched on a ladder, felt a cold, firm hand pressed down on his shoulder. He turned, but no one was there. Terrified, the workers fled, leaving their tools scattered in the room. These early signs of the supernatural hinted at deeper mysteries within the walls. When we finally moved in, I was 16. From the first night, odd things began happening. The doorbell would ring in the dead of night, only to reveal no one on the porch. One morning, my cousin woke up to see 2 glowing eyes staring at him through the window, but when he rubbed his eyes, the eyes vanished. Thinking it was just a trick of the light, he brushed it off, until they disappeared for good. One evening, our housekeeper was trapped in an upstairs closet, unable to open the door until my mom heard her frantic cries. The latch had fallen shut by itself, even though no one else was upstairs at the time. One of the most unsettling events occurred one quiet night when I heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. The sound was deliberate, almost as if someone were pacing the floors. Thinking it was my grandmother, known for her heavy slippers, I called out to her. There was no response, and the footsteps stopped abruptly. The next morning, she assured me she hadn't gotten up during the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still walking the house. Over time, we got used to the creaks and groans of the old house, but the spirits made their presence known. One morning, the back door, my great-grandmother's favorite door that led to the wraparound porch, was mysteriously unlocked. I always wondered if it was her spirit, still wandering in and out of the house she loved so much, or if it was one of the earlier families who had lived there. No one could say for sure, but it happened often. Tragically, in the late 1980s, the house was destroyed in an arson fire. Witnesses claimed to hear horrifying screeches and the sound of crying as the flames consumed the house. One man even swore he saw a figure in the upstairs window, watching helplessly as the building collapsed. My parents rushed to the scene in the early hours of the morning, but by the time they arrived, Crescent Hollow had been reduced to nothing but ash. When I arrived later that day, the air was thick with the scent of smoke, and the earth beneath my feet felt heavy. Standing among the ruins, I could feel the spirits of the house lingering, mourning the loss right along with us. Even after the fire, the land still seemed to hold memories. My sister, who later built her home on the property, continued to experience strange occurrences. Around Christmas time, she would often smell an overwhelming scent of jasmine, despite it being the dead of winter. It would fill her room, her bathroom, and even follow her to her car. The scent was so vivid, so unmistakable, she could describe it as peaceful, but undeniably otherworldly. Other times, the smell of pipe tobacco would appear, sometimes as if someone were sitting right next to her, puffing away. On one occasion, her husband heard a child's voice softly calling, "Here, kitty," late one evening. He searched the entire house but found no one. As the years passed, more strange events occurred. Toys in the attic would move on their own, rolling across the floor with their switches off. A gust of freezing air once swept through the dining room, passing between family members before vanishing into thin air. Even though these moments were unnerving, the spirits never seemed malicious, just present, like echoes of the past lingering where they once lived. Eventually, the strange occurrences began to fade, but the memories of Crescent Hollow still linger. We never found out exactly who or what was behind the phenomena. Was it John W. Johnson, still puffing on his cigars? Or perhaps it was Leela Davis, the caring matriarch, still looking after the home she cherished? Or was it the spirits of the families who lived there before us, bound by the land? Today, though Crescent Hollow is no more, the land holds a special place in my heart. Its spirit still lingers in the stories, the memories, and the sense of presence that refuses to fade with time. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It was a cold, restless night in Pine Lake, and I was on the night shift at an old psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of town. Over the years, I've witnessed my fair share of strange and unexplainable events, as have my coworkers, but one experience still haunts me. It's the kind of thing that makes you question what's real and what's not. Let me set the scene for you. There were 3 of us on the night shift, 1 nurse and 2 psychiatric technicians, including myself. We were tasked with caring for patients who were dealing with everything from severe mental health crisis to the grueling process of detoxing from substances. But this particular story centers around a man who had been detoxing from alcohol. His behavior had been growing more erratic by the hour. He was talking to himself, shouting that "a man is in my room," and struggling to even recognize basic objects like the urinal next to his bed. It's not uncommon for detoxing patients to get confused, but this guy's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Meanwhile, the nurse and the other tech were huddled around the glucometer, a machine used to check blood sugar. Earlier that evening, the nurse had discovered the machine wasn't working, and we had run out of blood sugar strips. Without a second thought, she called the main hospital and demanded they send over the strips by taxi. The courier could have easily delivered them in the morning, but she insisted on the urgency. At the same time, the other tech managed to get the glucometer working again, using nothing but a paperclip to reconnect the battery. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like a small victory. As all this was happening, I walked over to the nurse's station to update them on the patient's increasingly bizarre behavior. The nurse suggested we check his blood sugar, since low levels can often cause confusion similar to what we were seeing in the patient. Just as she finished speaking, we heard it. 3 sharp knocks at the door. The door was surrounded by glass windows, giving us a clear view of the hallway, but when we looked, there was no one there. The other tech laughed and said, "It's just the ghost messing with us again," referring to the strange occurrences we'd grown used to. But something about those knocks felt different. They were urgent, almost desperate. Without thinking, I opened the door and went straight to the patient's room. When I entered, he was sitting on the bed, pointing toward the corner of the room. "He's right there," he yelled, his voice trembling with fear. At first, I assumed it was just another hallucination, something we saw often in our line of work. But then I saw it. In the corner of the room was a figure, its outline glowing in a bluish, fiery hue, like the flame from a gas stove. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at it, frozen in place. Finally, I turned to the nurse and whispered, "We need to check his blood sugar now." She didn't hesitate. She was already preparing. When we tested his blood sugar, it was dangerously low, low enough to cause a coma. We called an ambulance right away and began trying to get the patient to drink some sugar water while we waited. At first he resisted, his body trembling in confusion. But then, something extraordinary happened. A glowing bluish hand appeared from the air, gently resting on his hand. It was the same ethereal, fiery glow I had seen earlier. The patient's eyes widened in shock as he stared at the hand. The other tech, who hadn't seen anything, kept asking, "What's wrong? What's happening?" I looked at the patient and almost without thinking said, "Your guardian angel is here. He wants you to drink this." And for the first time that night, the patient smiled, taking a sip of the water. The ambulance arrived shortly after, and they rushed him to the ER. The doctors later confirmed that his blood sugar was so low that he could have easily slipped into a coma or worse. But thanks to our quick actions, and maybe something else entirely, he was stabilized and, as of the last update I received, was doing well. Once the ambulance left, the three of us sat in stunned silence at the nurse's station. After a few minutes, we began talking, piecing together what had happened. The nurse's insistence on getting the strips immediately, the tech's resourcefulness in fixing the glucometer, my quick judgment to check the patient's blood sugar, and of course, the mysterious knocks that had led us straight to him. It was as if some unseen force had guided the night. I'll never forget that hand, nor the overwhelming feeling that we weren't alone in that room. There's no doubt in my mind that something, or someone, was watching over us that night. When we moved into our first house, our daughter was only 18 months old. The house was an old, charming 75-year-old farmhouse that needed a lot of work. It had its quirks: creaky floors, old wallpaper, and an unexplainable smell in the attic, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. At first, the little things we experienced could be easily explained away: doors opening and closing on their own, lights flickering, and the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the hallways. Our 2 cats and dog never seemed bothered, so we didn't give it much thought. That is, until things started happening that we couldn't ignore. One afternoon, my daughter was napping in her room, and my husband was watching TV in the living room. Out of nowhere, the ceiling fan above him started turning on and off by itself. The whirring sound caught his attention, and when he looked up, he saw the fan spinning rapidly. Then, without warning, a large picture frame hanging on the wall behind the sofa fell down, crashing to the floor, narrowly missing his head. It hit the back of the couch and toppled right onto him. He had a nasty bump on his forehead and a lingering unease that he couldn't shake. The scariest event happened just before my daughter turned 2. One night she woke up screaming, and I rushed to her side. The moment I picked her up, she clung to me like her life depended on it. Her tiny arms and legs wrapped tightly around me, her whole body trembling. She was speaking, but not in her usual toddler chatter. It was strange, almost like a foreign language. For a little girl who had been speaking quite clearly for her age, this was terrifying. Every time I tried to put her back in her crib, she panicked, gripping me even tighter, muttering in that strange tongue. Eventually, we brought her into our bed, where she sat upright, still talking in this eerie, unfamiliar language. We tried to turn off the lights, but as soon as we did, her screams grew louder, her panic escalating. At that point, I was on edge, almost expecting her head to start spinning like something out of The Exorcist. Then, just as abruptly as it started, she stopped. For a brief moment, she looked up at me and said, "Mary, Mary is dead." My husband and I froze. We both heard it, clear as day. Did she really just say that? Before we could process what had just happened, she slipped back into her strange babbling. We eventually calmed her down, and she fell asleep. The next morning, I asked her who Mary was. She just stared at me, confused, and replied, "I don't know. Mary Poppins is on TV." She had no memory of the strange episode from the night before. That wasn't the only odd occurrence. Sometimes she would spike high fevers, and during those episodes, she would talk to people who weren't there. Once, she stared right through me and asked, "Mommy, who's that man over there?" I froze in place. There was no one else in the room. A few years later, after we had become somewhat accustomed to these strange happenings, something even more unsettling occurred. One night, after we had gone to bed, we heard the unmistakable creak of the basement door opening. Our dog, who normally slept soundly in the kitchen, didn't react at all. My husband went downstairs to check, but when he got to the basement, the door was wide open and the light was on, something he was sure he had turned off earlier that night. He shut the door and went back upstairs. As we were talking about it, we heard the same creak again. My husband bolted downstairs and found the basement door wide open once more, the light still on, and our dog resting calmly in his spot. At this point, he was truly rattled. "There's someone in the house," he shouted. Grabbing a stone statue for protection, he checked every room, every closet, every corner. But of course, there was no one there. It's been 8 years since we moved in, and 6 since the last incident. I tried not to dwell on it too much. I even told my husband not to tell me if anything strange happens again. But deep down, I still believe that if something truly malicious was lurking in our home, we would have felt it by now, or the animals would have reacted. Curious, we once asked our neighbor about the house's history. She had lived next door for over 50 years and had seen many families come and go. She told us that a woman had passed away in the house many years ago, but she couldn't recall her first name. Back then, everyone referred to each other by formal titles, so details about the woman's life were scarce. Maybe it's better that way. After everything we've experienced, I'm not sure I want to know more. This story happened to my uncle Mike back in 1971 when he was living alone in an old house on the edge of Pine Lake, Georgia. He and my aunt, Lisa, had recently gone through a tough separation, and Mike was still adjusting to life on his own. He had always been a meticulous person when it came to keeping his house clean, but like anyone, there were days when he just couldn't keep up. One night, after finishing his supper, Mike left the dirty dishes piled in the sink, countertops cluttered with the remnants of the meal, and the kitchen in a general state of disarray. He figured he'd clean it up in the morning, before heading out to work. The next morning, something strange happened. When Mike walked into the kitchen, it was nothing like the mess he remembered leaving behind. The counters were spotless, the dishes washed, and the kitchen gleamed as if it had been carefully cleaned. To top it off, there was a fresh pot of coffee brewing, and a steaming cup of it was already poured, waiting on the counter, as though someone had just prepared it for him. Confused but thinking maybe Lisa had come by to tidy up, Mike called her name. No answer. He glanced out the window to see if her car was in the driveway, but it wasn't. Still puzzled, he picked up the cup of coffee, shrugged, and decided he'd call her later to ask why she'd left so quickly. That evening, as soon as he got home, Mike called Lisa. "Thanks for cleaning up the kitchen this morning," he said, "and for the coffee. But why didn't you stay? I didn't even hear you come in." "I wasn't there," Lisa said sharply, her tone colder than he expected. "I haven't been there at all since I left." "Come on, don't lie to me," Mike said, frustration rising. "The kitchen couldn't have cleaned itself." "I'm telling you the truth," Lisa snapped. "I haven't been near that house." Annoyed, Mike retorted, "Fine. I don't know why you're lying, but I don't need you coming over here cleaning unless you plan on moving back in." With that, he hung up. Later that night, Mike left the kitchen messy once again, thinking he'd see if the same thing happened the next morning. And sure enough, the next morning, when he entered the kitchen, everything was perfectly clean again, dishes washed, counters wiped down, and a fresh cup of coffee poured. This time, Mike didn't bother calling Lisa. If she wants to clean and make coffee, he thought, so be it. But when he came home that evening, he noticed something different. His bed, which he had deliberately left unmade that morning, was now neatly arranged. A shiver ran down his spine. He called Lisa again, but she gave the same answer. She hadn't been there. Then she added something that made his blood run cold. "Mike," she said quietly, "have you thought about that ring we found downstairs? The one that kept disappearing from the headboard. The one in the old toolbox." Mike had brushed off her concerns about the ring at the time, but now, standing in the tidy house, he wasn't so sure. He decided he had to figure out what was going on. That night, Mike set his alarm for an hour earlier than usual, determined to catch the visitor in the act. But he woke up before the alarm went off. As he lay there, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling, he heard the unmistakable sounds of someone moving around in the kitchen. Water running, dishes clinking, the soft rhythmic sound of cleaning. Quietly, he slipped out of bed, his heart racing, and tiptoed toward the kitchen. Just as he reached the doorway, everything stopped. The water turned off. The noises faded. He flicked on the kitchen light, but there was no one there. The only evidence of activity was the clean kitchen, the fresh pot of coffee, and the steaming cup poured and sitting on the counter, waiting for him. Shaken to his core, Mike stood there for a moment, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. Without touching the coffee, he turned and walked back to his room, his mind reeling. He quickly got dressed and went to work. That evening, instead of returning home, Mike rented a motel room. He never spent another night in that house. Within days, he found a new place to live and moved out for good, leaving the house at Pine Lake behind. No one ever figured out who or what was cleaning the kitchen, but Mike was sure of one thing: some things are better left unexplained. When I was a young man growing up on a farm in the rolling hills of rural Tennessee in the mid-1940s, my family experienced something that some would call an encounter with dark forces. It was a time of struggle and uncertainty, and the events of that winter have haunted me ever since. It was a bitterly cold January, and a vicious flu outbreak was sweeping through our small town. Back then, it was simply referred to as the flu, but it was no ordinary illness. It was deadly. Many of our neighbors had already succumbed, and the ground had frozen so hard that graves couldn't be dug. The bodies of the deceased were placed in makeshift storage at the local barn until the thaw came. It was a grim, oppressive winter. Our family, my parents, 5 sisters, and 4 brothers, had managed to stay healthy, what we believed to be a blessing. But on the morning of January 5th, my youngest sister, Sarah, woke up with the telltale symptoms. At first, it seemed like any regular flu. My mother, always the caretaker, stayed by Sarah's side, keeping us at a distance to prevent the sickness from spreading. But by the second day, Sarah's condition worsened. By the third, she was burning with fever, her skin ghostly pale, her breaths shallow. Dr. Adams made the difficult journey from the nearby town of Oak Ridge to examine her. But after checking her over, he gave us the devastating news: Sarah was beyond saving. He left some medicine for comfort and hurried back to care for his other patients. We were all heartbroken. Sarah looked so frail, so close to death that even we, children, could sense the finality of the doctor's words. But my mother refused to give up. In her desperation, she recalled something she had overheard in town. A piece of gossip that now seemed worth considering. Just a week before, she had heard talk about old Millie Jacobs, a reclusive woman who lived alone in a dilapidated farmhouse in the hills on the outskirts of town. Some called her a healer, others a meddler, and still, others whispered that she was a witch. Millie had claimed that the flu wasn't a disease but was the work of dark spirits preying on the town. If they'd come to me instead of the doctor, Millie had bragged, I could have saved them all. At the time, my mother had dismissed it as nonsense, but now, with Sarah slipping away, she clung to that memory as though it might be our only hope. She sent my brother Michael to fetch Millie. When Millie arrived, she wasted no time. She walked straight to Sarah's bedside, lifted her eyelids and stared at her vacant eyes. She gently held Sarah's limp hands, examining her palms, and then closed her own eyes, as if in deep concentration. When she opened them again, her gaze shifted directly to the pillow beneath Sarah's head. Without a word, Millie yanked the pillow away and, pulling a small knife from her bag, slid it open. Feathers flew into the air like snowflakes drifting down on a quiet winter's day. As they settled, she pointed to something in the mess of down. There, amidst the chaos, was a perfect circle of feathers, bound together by some unseen force. Look, she said sharply, and we all leaned in, a mixture of horror and curiosity filling our hearts. Millie raised her hand and tore the circle apart with a single motion. She then turned to me and my brothers, and ordered us to gather every last feather and burn them to ash. We did as she commanded, carrying the remnants of the pillow out to the fire pit behind the house and lighting the blaze. While we were outside, my mother said that Millie searched the rest of the house, inspecting every pillow for more of the feather rings. She found none. By the time we returned, something remarkable had happened. Sarah's fever had begun to break, and a faint flush had returned to her cheeks. But Millie wasn't done. She went outside and scattered a strange dust from her bag around the doors and windows of our home. Once satisfied, she told my mother that her work was complete. She requested payment, a fair stipend, as my mother described it, and left as quickly as she had arrived, with Michael driving her back up the hill. The very next day, Sarah's fever broke completely. She started to recover steadily, and over the following weeks, she returned to her usual lively self. Later, my mother confessed that Millie had told her something chilling. If the feather rain in the pillow had completed its circle, Sarah would have died. From that night on, we believed that Millie had saved our sister's life. And though no one dared to speak it aloud, we were all convinced of one thing. Millie Jacobs was no ordinary woman. Whether she was a healer, a witch, or something else entirely, she had done what no doctor could. It was the winter of 1985, and my mother and I were driving home after a long day of work. The evening was cold, the fog rolling in thick across the road, and we were running behind. I could feel the tension rising. We both knew the family would start worrying if we didn't get home soon. I was 16 years old, the youngest of 8 siblings. To help make ends meet, I'd taken a part-time job at a small diner where my mom worked. Money was tight, especially with Christmas just around the corner. We found ourselves talking about how lucky we were to have our health, even when things felt hard, and how there were people out there with much less than we had. The gas gauge was dipping dangerously close to empty, and we still had nearly 2 weeks to go before payday. My mom stayed calm, but I could tell she was getting anxious. We stayed on our usual route, winding through the foggy country roads, when suddenly we rounded a sharp curve and saw a figure standing by the side of the road. It made us both jump. The person was tall, thin, and dressed in a long coat, almost blending into the fog. My mom slowed the car and pulled over, even though I immediately felt uneasy. I begged her not to stop. My dad always told us, never pick up a stranger, but my mom, always the kind-hearted one, rolled down her window and called out to the figure, asking if they needed help. I felt my heart racing as I reached for a heavy flashlight in the back seat, just in case. The figure stepped forward, revealing it was a woman, tall, slender, and seemingly harmless. But I wasn't convinced. I gripped the flashlight tightly, just in case. The woman spoke to my mom in an accent, and I soon realized she was speaking German. My mother, who was born in Germany, responded to her in kind. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but I could tell the conversation was calming. After a moment, my mom turned to me and asked if we could give the woman a ride. The woman explained that her ride hadn't shown up, and she had no way to get home. I hesitated. Why can't she just call someone? I asked. My mom explained that the woman had recently moved from Germany and didn't have a phone yet. Something about it felt off, but my mom reassured me that it would be fine. Reluctantly, I agreed but insisted on sitting in the back seat, keeping a tight grip on the flashlight. The woman climbed into the front seat and my mom started driving. The two of them spoke in German, and I felt left out, the tension in the air making my skin crawl. As we drove on, I began to notice that we weren't heading in the direction of home. My stomach sank as I remembered the nearly empty gas tank. I pointed it out to my mom, and she looked a little concerned but said we'd figure it out. The woman guided us off the main road onto an unfamiliar exit. The area looked strange, almost deserted, with only a few old houses scattered about. We followed her directions until we pulled up to a small, cozy-looking home. I was relieved, thinking we could finally head home. But just as she reached the door, she turned back and came up to my mom's window. She held out her hand, offering something wrapped in paper. My mom politely declined, saying, "No, I'm just happy to help." But the woman insisted, pressing it into my mom's hand and closing her fingers around it. She then said a few more words in German, smiled, and walked back toward the house. As we drove away, I asked my mom what the woman had said. She explained that the woman had thanked us for our kindness and wished us a safe journey home through the fog. We talked about the encounter as we drove, not even considering the gas situation until we suddenly realized we made it all the way home without running out. Once we parked, my mom opened the paper the woman had given her. Inside were 5 $100 bills. My mom's eyes welled up with tears. "I can't keep this money," she said. "We'll have to return it in the morning." The next morning, we set out to find the woman's house and return the money, but something strange happened. We couldn't find the exit, the house, or any familiar landmarks. We searched for hours, but the more we looked, the more the area seemed to shift. Eventually, we gave up and drove home in silence, each of us feeling overwhelmed by the strange events. To this day, I believe that woman wasn't just a stranger. She was something more, a guardian angel who appeared when we needed her most. I'll never forget that night, and part of me hopes that one day I'll see her again. When I was a little girl, my parents bought a piece of land in the Sierra foothills of Northern California. It was a stunning stretch of land, covered with wild grass fields and a seasonal creek that would fill up during the rainy months. They planned to build our dream home on top of a ridge, where the view seemed to stretch forever. Even before they laid the first brick, there were signs of the land's rich history from the gold rush days. We discovered 2 old wagon trails that ran in opposite directions, one leading toward a town called Deadwood, and the other winding toward Sutter Creek. An ancient oak tree stood on the property, its thick trunk scarred with time. Large wooden steps had once been nailed into its side, though by the time we moved in, the tree had grown so much that the steps started halfway up its trunk. We also unearthed relics, old horseshoes, a rusted hoof scraper, and pieces of barbed wire, with square nails still embedded in the posts, quiet reminders of the lives that had passed through here. Construction on the house began in the early 1980s, and my family, my mom, dad, baby sister, and I, moved in as soon as it was finished. At first, it was everything my parents had dreamed of, but it didn't take long for strange things to start happening, and those events had never truly stopped. It began with little things disappearing. Christmas ornaments, my favorite toys, and small trinkets that would later turn up in strange places, as though they had been moved by invisible hands. My mom's cat, Charlie, refused to go anywhere near the basement. He would hiss and arch his back, staring at the empty stairs like he saw something, or someone, that we couldn't. As time went on, the occurrences grew more unnerving. My parents began seeing strange figures in the house. When I was about 3 years old, I had been sent to my room for misbehaving, like most toddlers do. My parents were in the kitchen, which had a clear view of the living room and the stairs leading to the basement. Suddenly, they saw a little girl with long hair laughing as she ran down the stairs and disappeared into the basement. Thinking it was me, they called out, "Get back to your room." But to their shock, I poked my head out from the doorway and shouted back, "I'm in my room." I only saw the girl once, a fleeting glimpse of her laughing as she darted down the stairs and vanished into the darkness of the basement. But that image has stuck with me all my life. A year later, my mom woke up in the dead of night to the soft, heartbroken sound of a child crying. It wasn't the kind of crying that belonged to my sister or me. It was a sorrowful sobbing, as though a little girl was calling for her mother. My mom checked on us, but we were both fast asleep. The crying didn't stop, echoing around the house, filling the empty spaces. She felt an overwhelming urge to comfort this unseen child. "Sha, it's okay," she whispered into the dark. "Mommy's coming." The crying gradually faded, but soon after, she heard the sound of a child's laughter, a joyful voice calling out, "Mommy, Mommy." Not all the spirits in the house were so kind. A darker, more malevolent presence began to reveal itself, especially to my mother. On several occasions, she would wake in the middle of the night, feeling as though invisible hands were choking her. She would struggle to breathe, and the terror would wash over her, leaving her exhausted and haunted. Over time, the strain of these experiences took its toll, and my parents' marriage broke down. My father's battle with alcoholism didn't help, and eventually he moved out. Despite everything, my mother, my sister, and I chose to stay in the house, unwilling to let go of the dream. Even after my father left, the disturbances didn't stop. My mom often heard the sounds of a party late at night, laughter, glasses clinking, voices drifting from rooms that no one was in. My sister and I heard footsteps overhead when no one else was home and strange noises coming from the basement. One afternoon, my aunt, who had come over to check on the cat, swore she saw the heavy curtain that served as the basement door lift on its own. It revealed nothing but darkness. Terrified, she ran upstairs, refusing to go back down even when the lights were on. There was a spot behind the house that my mom would never go near. The ground there felt soft and strange, as if something was buried beneath it. When she dug, she found blackened soil, as if a fire had scorched the land long ago. Even now, I feel uneasy walking there, as though the earth itself remembers the dark things that happened. Eventually, we moved out, and my dad moved back into the house. My sister and I would visit him on weekends, and the strange happenings continued. Books would fall off shelves on their own and slowly turn their pages. Toys would turn on by themselves, and sometimes we could hear faint whispers coming from beneath the floorboards, where a dirt sub-basement lay. Neither of us dared to venture into that space. It felt like something was watching us from the darkness, a malevolent presence that wanted us gone. Over time, the spirits in the house seemed to change. The woman and child grew fainter, but every now and then, I feel a soft, comforting hand on my shoulder during times of sadness or fear. Once, I even heard light-hearted whistling outside the kitchen window, as though a young man was there, watching over me, bringing me a strange sense of peace. The house still stands, a monument to the eerie, and the land beneath it feels like a thin veil between our world and another. The spirits still linger, existing in a world of their own, holding on to the stories they left behind. Even though we've long since moved on, a part of me wonders if those entities, both kind and dark, are still there, waiting for someone to uncover the secrets they keep buried beneath the earth. When I was in high school, I was always involved in school activities. I was on the cheerleading team, a member of the yearbook staff, and always ready to help out with school events. During my senior year, my class came up with an idea to raise money for prom and graduation by creating a haunted house for Halloween. It seemed like a fun idea. Other senior classes had done it before, usually by using old barns or other properties they had in our small town. We, however, thought we could draw a bigger crowd by using a building downtown. After getting permission, we chose the second floor of a building that housed the town's community center on the first floor. It seemed like the perfect place since the community center was a popular hangout spot for kids. But the second floor had a much darker history. It had once been a morgue in the early 1900s, back when the town was first founded. At the time, we thought the history would give the haunted house an eerie touch. Looking back, it was probably a terrible idea. The second floor was in awful condition. The stairway was so narrow that we had to turn sideways to climb it, and the floors creaked underfoot. The walls were covered in peeling yellow and black paint, and everything had an air of abandonment. But to us, it felt like the perfect setting for something spooky. When a group of 7 of us went up to clean the space, we found old boards, trash, dead mice, and even a wooden coffin. We thought it was perfect for the haunted house, so we left the coffin and cobwebs exactly where they were. It added to the effect. We spent hours after school transforming the space into a haunted house. Each of us picked a character to play. I was a vampire inspired by the creepy Elvira, complete with a coffin I could rise out of to surprise visitors. One girl was the guide, leading groups through the house. Another dressed as a ghost, wearing tattered white clothes dusted with flour. 4 of the guys played various roles: a werewolf, 2 ghouls who jumped out from behind furniture, and one who wore a gorilla mask and hid in a small closet. The guide's job was to lead visitors into the pitch-black closet, shut the door, and leave them alone for a few seconds. The guy in the gorilla mask would then scare them by flashing a light on his face and yelling. It was simple, but it worked. The haunted house ran for 2 nights. The first night went off without a hitch, aside from some flickering lights, which we blamed on the building's old wiring. But the second night, Halloween night, things started to get strange. It happened during the last tour group of the evening. Everything started as usual. I jumped out of my coffin to startle the visitors in the first room. The werewolf growled and snarled in the second room. The ghouls jumped out from behind furniture, and the ghost girl wandered through the space with a blank, eerie expression. Finally, the guide led the group into the closet, shut the door, and held the knob as usual. At first, it was quiet, but then, out of nowhere, the group inside started screaming at the top of their lungs, pounding on the door as though desperate to escape. The guide quickly opened the door, and the terrified group stumbled out, their faces pale. One of them exclaimed, "That was amazing. It looked so real." Another said she thought she might have a heart attack. The guide turned to congratulate the guy in the gorilla mask, only to find the closet empty. Confused, she stood there for a moment, realizing there was no way out of the room except through the door she'd been holding shut. Just then, the guy in the gorilla mask walked up the stairs, mask in hand. He'd gone downstairs to use the bathroom and hadn't been in the closet at all during the last tour. The tour group's excitement quickly turned to shock. One of them, pale as a ghost, stammered, "But we saw a man in a gray suit. He smiled at us, and his face lit up. He was floating." We froze. The realization hit us like a cold wind. Without saying much, we shut the haunted house down immediately and left the building. We didn't even go back to clean up. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that closet, but I'll never forget the look on the faces of that tour group, or the chill that ran down my spine when they described the man in gray. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I was only 7 years old in 1977, but the events of that night are as vivid in my mind as if they happened just yesterday. We were a large family, 10 of us living in an old farmhouse on the outskirts of a small town in the Midwest. The house was massive for such a big family, with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a bathroom, 2 parlors, and a laundry room on the first floor. The second floor had 2 more bedrooms, and a cozy sitting room that we used to gather in during the evenings. The house had its quirks, creaky floors, cold spots, but it was home. That spring, my parents decided to add a second bathroom upstairs. With so many kids, sharing just one bathroom had become nearly impossible. A relative who worked as a plumber came over to help with the project, and while digging into the walls, he found something odd, a small room sealed off behind the chimney. It was barely big enough to fit a clawfoot tub, a sink, and a toilet, but it was perfect for the new bathroom. While working, he discovered some strange items tucked away in the floor joists, a pair of faded jeans, an old carpenter's apron, and a ball. We thought it was odd, but figured it was just remnants from the house's long history. By summer, the bathroom was finished. It became one of the coziest places in the house, with the heat from the chimney making it always warm. My sister and I shared the room next to it, and we liked to leave the bathroom light on at night. The soft glow from the light shining through the cracks in the door made it feel safe, comforting even. One stormy night, I was woken up by the loud rumble of thunder. The storm made me nervous, so I crawled into bed with my sister, seeking comfort. Eventually, I fell back asleep, but not long after I woke again, this time from the discomfort of a full bladder. As I sat up, I glanced toward the bathroom door. That's when I saw her, someone standing in the soft glow of the light. She was a woman I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it might be my mother, but as she turned to face me, I realized it wasn't. She had long, curly hair that spilled out from under a bonnet, and she wore a flannel nightgown, lace trimming the sleeves. Her smile was beautiful, her teeth bright white, but her eyes, there was something off about them. They were dark, no whites visible, just endless blackness. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't respond. Instead, she took a step toward me, her arms outstretched as though she wanted to embrace me. I felt a chill creep up my spine, but she didn't stop. I called out to my sister, trying to wake her, but she didn't stir. The woman came closer, and before I knew it, she was at the edge of the bed, reaching toward me. Her hands, when they touched my stomach, were ice cold. I pulled away quickly, scrambling over my sister to the other side of the bed, pressing my face into the pillow, trying to hold my breath and stay perfectly still. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up the next morning, I was lying alone in bed, and my sister was angrily shaking me. "You wet the bed. "Get off, you freak," she yelled, slapping my arm. I tried to tell her what had happened, but she was too mad to listen. Less than a year later, during the terrible blizzard of 1978, our house burned down in the dead of night. It was 2 a.m., and though we all made it out safely, everything we had was lost in the flames. While my parents rebuilt on the same lot, I stood near the charred remains of the house one afternoon when an old man and woman pulled up in a dusty car. They walked toward the ruins, and I, curious, asked if they needed help. They smiled sadly and asked me what had happened. I explained the fire, and they told me that they had grown up in that very house, taken in as foster children by their aunt, who had cared for many kids over the years. They spoke lovingly about her, how kind and nurturing she had been. But then they told me something that made my heart race. She had passed away in that house, upstairs, in the sitting room, while rocking in her chair. My blood ran cold. I remembered the woman from that night. I didn't tell them about what I had seen, but in that moment, I felt something shift. Maybe she wasn't a stranger after all. Maybe she was the kind aunt they had described, a gentle presence still lingering in the house, even after death. The thought didn't make me afraid anymore. It brought a strange sense of peace. Years later, while talking to one of my sisters, she mentioned something that sent chills down my spine. She told me about a night when she had seen a woman standing at her dresser, picking up her perfumes and smelling them. When she looked away, the woman was gone, vanished without a trace. Even now, when I think about that night, I wonder, could it have been the same woman I saw? Was she still watching over us, even after all these years, even after the house was gone? I don't know, but I believe she was there, a quiet, comforting presence, a memory I'll never forget. It all began when I took a part-time job as a bouncer at a small nightclub in a quiet town called Pine Lake. Most of the other guys I worked with were much bigger than me, and they loved teasing me about being the smallest guy on the team at just 5'9". One night, though, I had to deal with a guy who was easily 6'4" and causing a scene. While the others hesitated to step in, I didn't back down. I handled him myself, roughing him up a bit. My boss noticed and pulled me aside afterward, saying I had potential but needed to bulk up if I wanted to earn the respect of the team. The very next day, I went out and bought some workout equipment, setting up a small gym in the corner of my apartment. Within a couple of weeks, I could already feel a difference, stronger, more defined. But one evening, while I was working out, I started getting this strange sensation, like someone was watching me. At first, I thought it was just my girlfriend, but when I turned around, no one was there. The feeling kept coming back, though nothing really unusual happened, so I never mentioned it to her. About 2 weeks later, I noticed something even stranger. Late at night, when everything was still, I'd catch the faint scent of perfume in the air. It would linger, filling the room. After I went to bed, I would feel the mattress shift, as if someone had climbed in beside me. It wasn't unsettling, though. It felt almost comforting, like a presence I couldn't see but knew was there. I even started greeting it. "Good night," I'd say before falling asleep. It always took the side of the bed where my girlfriend would sleep when she got home from her late shift. Growing up in a big family, I was used to keeping my bedroom door closed at all times. My girlfriend would always tease me about it, but I couldn't help it. One night after a long shower, I lay down in bed, and once again, that familiar feeling joined me. I jokingly said, "About time you got here." I was starting to feel neglected. This time, though, something was different. I felt an arm wrap around me, like a spouse might. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself it was nothing. But then the door slammed open, violently, like someone had thrown it open in anger. I sat up, expecting to see my girlfriend standing there, but the doorway was empty. Before I could process what was happening, the room turned ice cold. I could see my breath in the freezing air, and my chest tightened with dread as the atmosphere grew suffocating. 2 deliberate footsteps echoed, and then, nothing. The silence shattered when something slammed into my chest, knocking the wind out of me and throwing me back onto the bed. Gasping for air, I barely had time to react before my pillow was shoved into my face with such force that I thought my nose had been broken. The pressure from the pillow was intense, pinning me down. I started kicking and swinging my arms, fighting desperately for control. After what felt like an eternity, I finally grabbed hold of something. It was cold and slick, but I gripped it as tightly as I could. Stumbling off the bed, I moved toward the door. As I passed the mirror, I froze. In the reflection, I saw myself standing there, blood dripping from my nose, my arms stretched out in front of me. But then I saw something else, handprints smeared across my clothes, as if something had been struggling to get away from me. Panic surged through me. I flung whatever I was holding toward the mirror. The glass shattered, and I bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I fumbled for the key and locked the door just as the thing inside began slamming against it. The noise was accompanied by a low, guttural laugh that sent chills crawling down my spine. I staggered back from the door, trying to catch my breath, when suddenly, the front door creaked open. My girlfriend stepped inside, frozen when she saw the blood on my face. "What happened?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. I opened my mouth to explain, but before I could speak, the door to my room exploded into splinters. A wave of pure malice surged into the hallway. I didn't wait for it to do more. Grabbing my girlfriend, I pulled her out of the house, and we ran to her car. Without a word, we drove off, not looking back. The next day, we packed up and left. Whatever had been in that room could have it. I wasn't staying around to find out what it wanted next. The story begins with Michael, my personal ghost, who has been with me for as long as I can remember. Michael is believed to have been a musician in a past life, and his presence has been a constant companion throughout mine. Over the years, he has made himself known in many ways, some subtle, others too clear to ignore. Recently, 2 of these encounters have left a lasting impression on me, showcasing just how unique and protective Michael can be. The first experience happened one warm July evening, shortly after I met Daniel, the son of a couple I've known for years. Daniel and I hit it off immediately. Despite being 2 years older than me, we had an uncanny connection, like we were 2 halves of the same person. Daniel is the lead singer of a local band, and soon I found myself attending their practice sessions, helping with promotions, and going to every concert they played. By the end of July, the band decided it was time to record their first album, and they invited me to join them at the studio. For 4 days, I sat behind the glass with the producer, Mike, watching my friends bring their music to life. It was an exhilarating, unforgettable experience. A few days ago, Daniel brought over the finished CDs. He had already listened to a few and called me earlier, sounding uneasy. "There's something strange on the CE," he said. "I need you to hear this." When he arrived, we played my favorite track, one I loved so much I had its title tattooed on my shoulder. As the song played, everything sounded perfect, until the break where there was supposed to be complete silence. That's when we heard it, distinct, rhythmic breathing. It wasn't random or accidental. It sounded deliberate, as if someone planned it. But it couldn't have been. I was there during the recording. Daniel, the lead singer, always pulled back from the mic during pauses to make sure no outside sounds were picked up. Yet there it was, clear and unmistakable on every copy of the CD. Was this Michael's way of leaving his mark, of taking one last chance to be part of the music he loved so much? I don't know, but it certainly felt like his signature. The second experience was far more frightening. It happened about 3 weeks ago, and I've never been so terrified in my life. After a particularly stressful week, I was lying on my couch, trying to relax with a book. Exhausted, I eventually put the book down, turned off the light, and settled under my blanket, listening to the radio. I had replaced my bed with a couch to save space in my room, so I was stretched out, my feet propped up on one end. As I drifted into that strange in-between state of sleep and wakefulness, where you can hear everything but can't move, something grabbed my arm and yanked me sideways. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. My body was paralyzed, and tears of pure terror rolled down my cheeks. I felt myself slipping halfway off the couch, and finally my eyes snapped open. Though my room was pitch black, I saw the shadowy outline of a figure standing next to me. It was massive. Its build alone was enough to make my stomach churn with fear. A friend of mine once told me that if I ever felt scared, I should look at my dog. "If he's calm, you're fine," he said. I turned my head, hoping for reassurance, but what I saw made my heart sink. My dog, who had been lounging on the back of the couch, jumped onto my chest, stared at the figure, and bolted like I'd never seen before. He hid under the couch for the rest of the night. I couldn't take my eyes off the figure as it moved to the foot of the couch in an instant. It grabbed my feet, and I instinctively jerked them under the blanket, tucking them beneath the cushion. Just as I was about to lose all hope, a second shadow appeared, the one I've come to recognize as Michael. His form lunged at the larger figure, and the two shadows collided in a clash that sent both of them disappearing into nothingness. Shaking, I turned on the light, too frightened to stay in the dark. I've slept with the lights on every night since. Did Michael save me from something malicious that night? I believe he did. Whatever grabbed me wasn't friendly, and it felt like it wanted to harm me. Michael stepped in before it could go any further. For that, I'll always be grateful. When I was 4, my Aunt Alice, who always seemed distant and cold, gave me a gift for my birthday. It was a homemade rag doll, worn from age but still stitched together with care. She told me it had been hers when she was a little girl, made by her grandmother who had passed away long before I was born. The doll had a strange history, and something about it always felt different. Until then, the only doll I'd ever owned was a faded, chipped baby doll I'd had since I was a toddler. I never understood why Aunt Alice, who rarely ever showed affection, would give me such a precious thing, but still I felt honored. For the first few nights, I loved the doll. It slept with me beside my pillow, and during the day, it always had a place of importance on my bed. But soon, the dreams started. I would see the doll lying on a wooden platform in what seemed like a dimly lit room. In the corner stood an old woman, my Aunt Alice's grandmother. Her face was pale, wrinkled, and crinkled as though it had seen a lifetime of secrets. She would mutter words in a language I couldn't understand. In her hand, she held something sharp, which she used to prick her finger. Drops of blood fell one by one onto the doll. Each drop seemed to make the air around me grow colder. As soon as the last drop hit the doll, I would wake up in sheer panic, my heart racing, gasping for breath. Night after night, the same terrifying dream haunted me. I'd run to my parents' room in the middle of the night, leaving the doll behind on my bed. After several nights of this, I could no longer bear it. I couldn't understand why the dreams kept coming, so I threw the doll to the back of my closet, thinking that hiding it might finally make it stop. But that night, the dream came again. Determined to be rid of it for good, I shoved the doll deep into the shed the next morning, hiding it under a pile of old quilts. To my relief, the dreams finally stopped. A few days later, my mom asked where the doll had gone. "Where's your rag doll?" she asked. I shrugged, pretending I didn't know, but soon she started looking for it everywhere. She checked under my bed and my closet and searched around the room. I thought I was safe until she bent down and pulled the doll out from the back of the closet. My stomach sank. I had no idea how it had gotten there. "I don't like it," I cried, my voice shaking. "I don't want it." Mom just looked at me, clearly annoyed, and told me I should be ashamed. She placed the doll back on my bed, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. That night, the dream came back, just as vivid and terrifying. The next morning, I took the doll and shoved it back into the shed. This time, I locked it inside an old suitcase, hoping that would be the end of it. Weeks went by, and I felt free from the nightmare. But one day, my dad went into the shed to find something. I followed him and watched as he picked up the suitcase to search behind it. When he opened it, the rag doll spilled out. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. "How did this get in here?" he asked, handing the doll to me. I couldn't answer. My hands trembled as I took it from him. It felt like it was mocking me. Its eyes, once dull, seemed to glisten in a way I'd never seen before. Back in my room, I threw the doll into the corner and rushed out, desperate to be away from it. But when I returned, my blood ran cold. The doll wasn't in the corner anymore. It was back on my bed, sitting upright, facing the door as if it were waiting for me. I screamed, and Mom came running. I pointed at the doll, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want it. Please, take it back." I sobbed. "I hate it." Mom didn't seem to understand. She tried to comfort me, but I couldn't explain the terror I felt. Finally, she promised to return it to Aunt Alice. When we brought the doll back to her house, Aunt Alice didn't ask any questions. She just smiled, a strange, knowing smile. She took a dusty leather case from her closet, placed the doll inside, and locked it tight. Without a word, she put it back on the shelf. That was the last time I ever saw her. 4 years later, Aunt Alice passed away. When we cleaned out her house, the leather case was gone. There was no sign of the doll either. No one knows what happened to them. Some believe she buried the doll on her property, but I never cared to ask. I only know one thing for sure. I never want to see that doll again. I can't explain what's been happening since I bought my house on Maple Street. From the very first moment I stepped inside, I could feel that something was there. It wasn't a chill or draft, but a presence, a subtle weight, like someone was watching me. When I first toured the house, I started imagining how I'd decorate it. One room, in particular, stood out, the study. I told my ex-husband that I could see it in bold stripes. He thought it was just my pregnancy hormones messing with me or my usual quirky imagination, but I couldn't shake it. The feeling was overwhelming, and I became obsessed with the idea of owning that house. I fought off other buyers with everything I had until I finally won. After we moved in, I needed to take my car in for some work. Too sick from my pregnancy to drive, I called a mechanic nearby. When I gave him my address, he surprised me by saying he knew a family that used to live there. He even had their phone number. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I decided to call. To my surprise, the family had been hoping to reach me. The granddaughter of the original owners answered and shared incredible details about the house's history. Her grandparents had bought the house in 1905. Her grandfather, who had a deep love for the rose garden out back, passed away suddenly from a heart attack while tending to his flowers. After his death, his wife, Edith, lived there alone until 1965. She was so attached to the home that she requested her funeral be held there, and even asked to lie in state in the dining room after she passed. Soon after our conversation, I came home to find an old scrapbook wedged in the front door. Edith's daughter had left it for me, hoping I'd see how the house had changed over the years. Something in that scrapbook stirred something in the house, and in me. The house had hardly changed since the pictures were taken. I was captivated, running my fingers over the same woodwork and radiators I saw in the photos. But as I turned the pages, I came across a photo of what is now my living room, and a flood of emotion hit me. I began sobbing uncontrollably. I walked the room, touching everything, whispering to myself, I want it back. I don't know what came over me. It was like I was grieving for something I'd never known. Then I came to a photo of the study, dated 1910. My heart stopped. The walls were striped, just like I'd imagined when I first walked in. I was shaken. I called a friend, and when she arrived, she found me completely inconsolable. That kind of reaction hasn't happened again, but other strange things started happening almost immediately. I began hearing things, cabinet doors opening and closing, the sound of plates clattering as if someone were helping me in the kitchen. Once in the middle of a cold December evening, I smelled lilacs, even though no flowers were in bloom. It wasn't until months later, when spring arrived, that I found a large lilac bush in the backyard, hidden until the warmer weather. One night, while my husband was away, I decided to read upstairs. I left the bedroom door open, keeping an ear out for my kids. About an hour in, I heard the distinct creak of a floorboard in the hallway. My bed faced the door, and when I looked up, I saw a shadowy figure standing near my son's room. Thinking it was one of my boys, I called out, but the figure didn't answer. It moved silently away. I got up quickly to grab my robe, but when I turned back, it was gone. Both of my boys were still asleep in their rooms. There was no way they could have moved so quietly on those old floors. I spent the rest of the night with all the lights on. When my husband came home, I told him what happened. He just brushed it off, saying I was imagining things. But the next night, something happened that even shocked him. As we were getting into bed, he tossed a pamphlet onto the mattress, saying he wanted to read it. When I looked at the cover, my blood ran cold. It was an emergency guide, with initials at the top spelling out E-Death. I screamed and threw it across the room. The next morning, I searched for the pamphlet, but it was gone. My husband swore he had no memory of it. Another time, I arrived home to see a figure standing in the doorway. Thinking it was my husband, I asked if he had been waiting for me, but he was in the living room watching football. He hadn't been anywhere near the door. I've seen that same figure in the doorway several times since, always standing there, watching, but never saying a word. Though these experiences have been unnerving, Edith, or whatever spirit is here, has never harmed us. She seems more like a guardian, still tied to the house she loved. One day, my new husband had a conversation with her while I was at work. He asked her not to show herself to him, since it frightened him, even though he understood she meant no harm. She agreed and has honored his request. But when I'm alone, I often hear her moving around in the kitchen or feel her gentle presence watching over us. In a strange way, it's a comfort to know she's still here, even after all these years. It was the fall of 1985 when I was 17, and my older sister, Sarah, had just been initiated into a Wiccan coven. One chilly afternoon, we sat on the grass in our backyard, the winds from the desert swirling around us, whipping the trees into a frenzy. As the wind howled, Sarah told me about the upcoming Samhain celebration, what she called So When. She explained that Halloween wasn't just about costumes and candy. It was the night when the veil between worlds thinned and spirits roamed freely. Her coven would gather at the edge of the desert near an old cemetery, under the dim glow of the waxing moon, calling spirits from their graves around a bonfire. I begged her to take me. I wanted to see the flames dance across the desert, hear the chants, and have my fortune told. But she shook her head, explaining that she wasn't allowed to invite anyone until she had completed her year and a day with the coven. Just think about where you've been, and step toward the future, she said, pressing a small silver pentagram into my hand. This is for protection. Keep it close. Some spirits aren't human, and they have a dark sense of humor. I promised I'd keep the talisman with me, but on Halloween night, dressed as the Red Queen, I completely forgot about it. I was too distracted by the excitement of the night ahead. My date, Kyle, already had another couple in his truck when he picked me up. We planned to crash a costume party at a friend's house, but none of us knew the exact address. Kyle figured we'd find it by spotting familiar cars or hearing loud music coming from somewhere. After hours of wandering through the neighborhood, we gave up and decided to head to the old cemetery instead. By the time we arrived, it was almost midnight. In the distance, I saw a ring of light glowing through the trees, and my mouth got the better of me. "Look, witches," I joked. "They're out there calling the dead." That was all it took for Kyle and Pete to dash ahead across the yard, leaving Alicia and me behind. We reluctantly followed, our feet dragging in the damp grass. As we got closer, we saw shadows moving around the fire, startled by the boys' intrusion. A distant howl from the wind sent chills down my spine. By the time Alicia and I caught up, Kyle and Pete were rolling around on the grass, laughing hysterically near the fire pit. I noticed the coven had circled around us, chanting softly in eerie voices. They called out to the spirits to play with us, their words sending an unnatural chill into the night air. We ran, laughing nervously, pretending it was all a harmless prank. But the rest of the night wasn't a prank. It was as if invisible forces followed us everywhere. We heard footsteps behind us, felt unseen hands tug at our shoulders, and watched small objects drift eerily through the air. Low, ghostly laughter echoed around us, sending waves of dread through my chest. The air itself felt thick with malice. I've never been so terrified in my life. When I finally returned home the next morning, Sarah was waiting for me. She was furious. "How could you?" she asked, her anger giving way to concern as she saw the fear etched on my face. She performed a purification ritual, and for the first time that night, I felt a deep, calming peace wash over me. But her words stayed with me, lingering in my thoughts. "Those spirits have marked you now," she said softly. "They'll come back every Halloween." At first, I didn't believe her, but year after year, strange things began happening on Halloween night. Doors and windows would slam shut on their own. The TV volume would spike without warning. Sprinklers would turn on in the yard, soaking me while I stood there. I learned to ignore it, telling myself it was all harmless. But this year feels different. The air feels heavier, and the spirits seem more restless. Before dawn broke this morning, I heard footsteps on the stairs. They're already here. When I look back on my life, there's one experience that stands out above all the others. It's not just because it's the only one I'm certain of, but also because of the deep, unsettling dread that still lingers from it. That summer, when I was 11, my grandfather passed away. He had been living with my Aunt Emily and Uncle Ben on their quiet farm in rural Kansas. After the funeral, my mom and I decided to stay a few more days. We shared a room upstairs, directly above the kitchen. Life on the farm started early, at the crack of dawn. My mom would wake up to help Aunt Emily prepare breakfast, while Uncle Ben would take care of the animals. As for me, being a lazy city kid, I stayed in bed, listening to their voices and the clinking of dishes from the kitchen below, waiting for them to call me down for breakfast. It was just the four of us, no other relatives, no hired help. The days were simple and quiet, almost peaceful. One morning, I woke suddenly with a deep sense of unease. The room was filled with the soft light of the rising sun, yet something felt wrong. I could hear my mom and Aunt Emily talking downstairs, and I could smell the bacon sizzling in the kitchen, but that uneasiness wouldn't leave. It was as if I had woken up into a different world, one that didn't feel quite right. Then I heard a man's voice calling from the front yard. "Hello, is anybody there?" The voice sent a cold chill through me. It was unfamiliar, and it didn't belong. My unease quickly turned to fear as the voice called out again, now closer, as if standing right on the porch. "Hello, is anybody home?" I wondered why no one was responding. My mom and Aunt Emily's conversation carried on as normal. Uncle Ben, who usually fed the chickens in the side yard by that time, didn't answer either. I prayed someone wouldn't respond, because deep down, I knew if they did, something terrible would happen. The voice kept calling out, over and over again. I pulled the pillow over my head, trying to drown it out, but it didn't stop. It was as though the voice was searching for someone, or something, and I didn't want it to find me. After what felt like forever, the voice finally stopped, and silence fell over the house again. Minutes later, my mom called me down for breakfast. When I entered the kitchen, Uncle Ben was sitting at the table too. I tried to make sense of what I had heard and asked who had come by that morning. My mom and Aunt Emily exchanged confused glances, and one by one, they all told me the same thing. No one had been there. I described the voice, how it had called out from the yard, then from the porch. Again, they all insisted they hadn't heard anything. Even Uncle Ben, who had been outside and could see the whole yard, said there was no one around. It didn't make sense. How could I have heard someone so clearly from upstairs when no one else, much closer, had noticed anything? It couldn't have been a dream. I was fully awake, and I could still hear the noises from the kitchen and smell the bacon cooking. I'd never had a dream so vivid, and I haven't had one like that since. So who, or what, was it? Could it have been my grandfather? I don't think so. I loved him deeply, and while hearing his voice might have frightened me, it wouldn't have filled me with the kind of dread I felt. My grandfather had a thick German accent, and the voice I heard didn't sound like his at all. And most importantly, the grandfather I knew would never intentionally frighten me or anyone in the family. Years later, my mom shared her own experience with Grandpa's spirit during a particularly hard time when she was caring for my terminally ill father. She woke up one night to see Grandpa sitting at the foot of her bed. He looked at her with kind eyes and said, "Don't worry, Han. Everything will be okay." Then he faded away. His words gave her the strength to care for my father until his passing. But whatever came to the farm that morning when I was 11 was something different. It wasn't Grandpa. It wasn't kind. And its intentions weren't friendly. Even after all these years, I don't know what it was or what it wanted. I only know that I'm grateful no one else heard it. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This story didn't happen to me, but to my parents when I was just a little kid. They didn't share it with me until I was much older, which only added to its authenticity. My parents were never ones to tell exaggerated tales, and the fact that they kept it to themselves for so many years makes me believe it happened exactly as they described. Here's their account, as they told it nearly 2 decades after the event. When I was 3 years old, we moved from our family home in small-town Oregon to a quiet suburb just outside Atlanta, Georgia. My parents weren't familiar with the area or its rich history, particularly the Civil War history that ran deep in Georgia. To them, the Civil War was something from the distant past, far removed from their everyday lives in Oregon. It wasn't until we moved to Georgia that they began to understand how close that history still felt in some places. One spring weekend, my parents were invited to spend the day at a friend's farm near a small town called Jackson, Georgia. They left me and my older brother with a babysitter and set off for what they expected would be a relaxing and uneventful day. It wasn't until the drive home that things took an eerie turn. The sun had already set, and the roads were dark and winding. Back then, the route was made up of old, 2-lane country roads surrounded by vast, empty fields. As they drove, a thick fog began to roll in, covering the road and the surrounding farmland in a dense, almost surreal haze. My father slowed down, barely able to see the road ahead. At first, the fog was just an inconvenience, but soon, my father began to feel something he couldn't shake, like they were being watched. It wasn't just a passing sensation. It grew stronger with every mile. He felt as though hundreds, maybe thousands, of eyes were fixed on them from somewhere within the fog. My mother had grown very quiet beside him, which only deepened his unease. Trying to break the silence, my father joked, "It's a real spooky night, huh?" My mother's response sent a chill down his spine. "Let's get out of here as fast as we can." From that moment on, neither of them spoke again until they reached the main road and the fog finally lifted. Even then, they didn't bring it up. They continued their drive home in silence, both of them feeling something heavy hanging in the air, an unsettling sense that something wasn't right. The next morning, over breakfast in the bright kitchen, my father finally mentioned the drive. "What did you think of that drive last night?" he asked. My mother hesitated, then admitted that the fog had truly scared her. Emboldened by the safe, sunlit space around them, my father shared what he'd felt. "Just before we left the fog, I felt like there were hundreds of men watching us," he said. "Soldiers, maybe." My mother looked at him for a long time, and then quietly replied, "I didn't feel them. I saw them. Row after row, hundreds and hundreds of soldiers. Most were on foot, but some were on horseback. They stood on both sides of the road, staring at us as we passed. They wore old coats and uniforms from another time. I've never been so scared in my life." She explained that she'd started seeing them before my father even mentioned the soldiers. She hadn't said anything at the time because she was too terrified to speak. A few days later, my father mentioned the experience to his friend, who told him they had unknowingly passed through the site of the Battle of Atlanta, one of the bloodiest, most pivotal battles of the Civil War. My parents were stunned. They had driven right through a place soaked in history and tragedy, where the echoes of the past seemed to still linger. Years later, my father would often take the same route for work, though he would admit that the area always gave him the creeps. He never had an experience quite like that night again, though. To this day, their story remains one of the most vivid and chilling accounts of the supernatural I've ever heard. It's not just the eerie encounter itself, but the haunting presence of history that seemed to bleed into the present on that foggy road, making the moment feel almost otherworldly. It was a chilly night in early October 2002 when my friends and I decided to spend the evening doing absolutely nothing. The kind of quiet night that only happens in small-town America. But as boredom crept in, we wanted to stir things up a bit. That's when Sarah, my best friend's girlfriend, pulled out an old Ouija board she'd found in her attic. We figured, why not? It seemed like the kind of harmless fun that would add a little thrill to the night. We headed down into the basement of my childhood home, a creaky old house on the edge of town that always had an eerie feel, even on the brightest days. Sarah lit a few candles, explaining that they were meant to protect us. I wasn't buying any of it. I mean, how could a toy made by Hasbro possibly open a portal to the unknown? I scoffed, pulling out my lighter and flicking the flame onto the board, curious to see if anything would happen. To my surprise, the board didn't catch fire. Sarah immediately scolded me, warning me that it was a bad omen and hoped we wouldn't regret it. We started off asking typical silly questions. Things like, what's my favorite movie? And who am I going to marry? But then, I decided to raise the stakes. I boldly asked if we could speak to the spirit of my late grandfather. The board moved almost instantly, spelling out a single word. No. Before we could process that, one of the candles blew out. There was no breeze. The basement felt oddly still, too still. My heart skipped a beat, and the tension in the room was palpable. We quickly moved the session to my friend Lucas's room, a small attic bedroom with low, slanted ceilings. It had always had a weird vibe to it, but tonight it felt even more oppressive. We set up the board again, lit fresh candles, and turned off the lights. This time, we asked to speak with an old historical figure, someone we all knew from history class, Nostradamus. The board answered yes. It claimed to be Nostradamus, and we eagerly asked it questions about the future. But when we asked about its favorite kind of music, it spelled out metal. That was strange. Nostradamus had lived in an age of classical music. There was no way he'd know about rock. As Lucas and Jake stepped into the hallway to grab more snacks, Sarah and I stayed behind, still curious but uneasy. I decided to ask something personal, something that only 3 people knew. What's the name of the girl I love? I whispered. The planchette moved again, spelling out her initials, then the letters K-A-T. My heart skipped. Kat was a nickname I had for her, a secret between us. Sarah didn't know it. When Lucas returned, I told him what had happened, and we all debated whether the board had really been communicating with something or if it was just a trick of the mind. But then things got even stranger. The candles, which had been flickering in the still room, suddenly blew out again. The room was sealed tight. Lucas's window was stuck shut. We had tried to open it countless times before, but it was locked tight. Yet now it felt colder than ever. We tried asking the board who we had really been speaking with. It spelled out Debbie. We pressed further, asking how she had died. The board responded with a single word, drowned. At that moment, the air seemed to thicken, and an oppressive weight settled over us. Every time we asked if we could leave, the board answered with a firm no. We sat in silence, waiting for it to release us, but it felt like an eternity before it finally allowed us to end the session. I bolted out of the room, terrified and relieved that it was over. But later that night, I realized I had left my cigarettes in Lucas's room. I hesitated, but after some convincing from my friends, I went back to get them. When I stepped into the room, my breath caught. The digital clock on Lucas's nightstand read exactly 12 o'clock. As I bent down to pick up my cigarettes, I saw it. The window, the one that had been painted shut for years, was wide open. Cold air rushed in, sending a shiver down my spine. I felt dizzy, weak, and collapsed onto the bed, my head spinning. Suddenly, a vivid image flashed through my mind. A woman's lifeless body floating underwater, her long hair drifting in the current, her eyes staring blankly. A single word echoed in my mind: Debbie. I snapped out of the vision just as the window slammed shut with a deafening bang. The TV flickered on, switching channels at an impossible speed. That was it for me. I ran out of the room, leaving my cigarettes behind. The next day, I told my friends what had happened, but they thought I had imagined it. Or maybe I was just freaked out from the bored session. To test it, we tried opening the window again. 3 of us tugged on it with all our strength, but it wouldn't budge. The window, which had been wide open just hours earlier, was now completely stuck. Since that night, I've refused to touch a Ouija board. My friends still joke about trying it again, but I always decline. It's not because I'm embarrassed. It's because I'm terrified of what might come through if we ever dared to play again. I know this might not sound like a typical ghost story, so I ask you to bear with me. The house my family and I live in is brand new. It was built just before we moved in, so I've never really believed it could be haunted. Nothing truly bizarre has ever happened here, not anything I could confidently call paranormal, anyway. To my knowledge, no one else in my family has had any strange experiences either, though I've never asked them directly. I suppose I've always been a little hesitant to bring it up, not wanting to sound like I've lost my mind. It all started years ago, but I can't pinpoint exactly when. I was pretty young at the time. I would often wake up in the middle of the night with an intense feeling of fear, like someone, or something, was standing in the room with me. Some nights, I wouldn't even manage to fall asleep, feeling paralyzed by a presence I couldn't explain. Other times, I'd wake up to see figures standing by my bed or just outside my room. They'd fade as soon as I became fully awake, and I'd be left questioning if I had really seen them at all. Over time, I began to recognize what felt like 3 distinct entities. The first is a young boy. He's the only one I've seen with any real clarity. He doesn't do anything threatening, but I've woken up to find him standing silently at the foot of my bed, as if he's waiting for something. It's never felt malicious, but it always rouses me from my sleep. The second is a female presence. She doesn't seem dangerous, but there's one clear indication of her that I'll explain later. The third presence is male, and he's the only one who feels remotely dangerous. On 2 separate occasions, when I felt him near, my right arm became painfully cold, and the skin on it would tingle like it was being touched by something icy. I've seen him as a pale white silhouette, but sometimes I wonder if he also appears as a dark shadow. It's difficult to say if they're the same entity or something entirely different. The most vivid experience happened a couple of years ago. I was sitting in bed, unable to sleep, feeling that familiar presence hanging in the air. Then I heard it, soft, almost unearthly. A female voice that simply whispered, "Hi." What made my blood run cold wasn't just the voice, but the fact that it was in English, not Spanish, my first language. I was frozen in fear, unable to move, unable to answer. All these strange occurrences have only ever happened at night and only in my room, which leads me to think that if this is some kind of haunting, it might be centered around me rather than the house itself. The most frustrating part of all this is the uncertainty. Every time something happens, it's either in near total darkness or at the edge of wakefulness. Those blurry moments where dreams and reality can blur together. Even the most vivid experience, the ghostly "hi," still leaves me questioning myself. Was it real, or was my mind just playing tricks? It's been almost a year since anything like this has happened. No figures by my bedside, no strange voices, nothing. And now I'm left more confused than ever. Was it all just my imagination running wild? Until something undeniably clear happens, I can only speculate. This story comes from my friend Devin, about her younger brother, Wyatt. Wyatt has always been remarkable in a way that's difficult to explain. Since he was little, he's had an uncanny ability to know things about people, like their dreams or what they were thinking. Devin wrote this account as a report for her English class and shared it with me because I'm mentioned in it. With her permission, I'm sharing it here. Wyatt was born when I was 4 and a half. 2 years earlier, my parents had another baby, a boy named Andrew, but he passed away at just 6 weeks old. His heart and lungs were too weak, and it broke our family. When Wyatt came into the world, my parents were busy with work, so they hired a babysitter, Rachel, to watch over us. She was 22, with a 5-year-old daughter named Kimmy. Every day, Kimmy came with Rachel, and the two of us would play while Rachel kept an eye on Wyatt. One afternoon, when I was about 6, Kimmy, who was almost 7, said something I'll never forget. "Rachel isn't going to babysit you and Wyatt anymore," she told me. Confused, I asked why. Her response was chilling. "Because your brother is friends with a ghost." That evening, I told my mom what Kimmy had said, expecting her to laugh it off. But instead, my mom went quiet. Then she called Rachel and spoke to her for what felt like hours. I didn't catch most of their conversation, but I remember my mom asking, "Has he started talking? And does he just sit there sometimes, even when I'm not around?" When the call ended, my mom sat silently for a long while, then turned to me. "Rachel and Kimmy won't be coming here anymore," she said. "From now on, you'll go to Rachel's apartment after school." That's exactly what happened for the next few years. By the time I turned 10 and Rachel stopped babysitting me, I hadn't been around to witness any of the strange things that seemed to follow Wyatt. It wasn't until I turned 13 that my mom started telling me what Wyatt had been going through, saying I was old enough to handle it now. When Wyatt gets home from school, she began, he goes straight to the bathroom. He locks the door and stares at the tile on the wall for nearly an hour. He cries uncontrollably during that time, repeating the same thing over and over. It sounds like, "I do, I do, I do." When he comes out, he's completely silent. Then he goes to his room, locks the door, and starts his homework. I've tried listening through the door, and I can hear him talking to people. But the scariest part is, I hear voices talking back. At first, I didn't believe her. Not because my mom had ever lied, but because I didn't want to believe it. So, I decided to skip soccer practice one Tuesday and stay home with Wyatt to see for myself. That Tuesday, I came home about 30 minutes after Wyatt. Sure enough, the bathroom door was locked. I pressed my ear against it and heard him crying. But instead of saying, "I do," it sounded like he was saying, "Andrew," over and over. I knocked gently, telling him to come out and start his homework. He opened the door, walked past me without a word, and went straight to his bedroom. Before he could lock the door, I slipped in behind him. "I'll do my homework in here with you," I said, "just in case you need help with math or something." Wyatt didn't say much. He just nodded and sat at his desk. For the next 15 minutes, everything seemed normal, except for one thing. Wyatt kept brushing at his shoulder, as if trying to get rid of something invisible. Finally, I reached over and brushed it off for him, to show him there was nothing there. To my surprise, he looked at me with wide eyes and said, "You see him too?" I froze, unsure of what to say. "Yes," I whispered. And then, the room grew icy cold, then unbearably warm, within seconds. I can't explain what happened next, but from that moment on, Wyatt stopped having trouble with ghosts or spirits. Whatever had haunted him was gone. It all began in the summer of 1995 when my family moved into our new home in the small town of Pine Lake. It was a beautiful, custom-built house, and we were so proud of it. However, there was one small problem. It only had 2 bedrooms. My parents took one, and my younger sister claimed the other. Since I was in college and only home during the summer and holidays, I made do with the living room, which was transformed into a makeshift bedroom. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. My room had a bed, a dresser, and an antique curio cabinet that seemed more suited to a dining room. The first night I returned home for summer break, strange things started happening. It began with loud noises, thumps, creaks, and distant scratching sounds that filled the house after midnight. I'd wake up every night, without fail, at exactly 3:47 a.m. My room would always be freezing cold, no matter how warm the rest of the house felt. At first, I brushed it off as nothing more than coincidence. But then, My mom started sharing other odd things that had been happening around the house. The gas fireplace would light itself, flickering with a strange, unnatural glow. Our cat, a small tabby named Smokey, would sit in front of a closet door for hours, staring as if in a trance. Doors would creak open on their own, and objects, photos, books, even a vase, would fall off shelves for no reason at all. And occasionally, we'd hear faint whispers, like voices carried through the walls. But then, one afternoon, things escalated. My mom returned home alone from a shopping trip and set a brand new hardback book on the kitchen counter. She started cooking dinner, and when she turned back around, she found the book with 6 paper clips neatly clipped along its pages, perfectly spaced. She had been completely alone in the house, except for Smokey. There was no explanation for the paper clips, and no one had touched the book. Who had placed them there, and why? At that point, we knew we needed help. A family friend suggested reaching out to her sister, Sue, who was known around town as a ghost whisperer. Sue had a unique gift of communicating with spirits, so my mom called her. Sue, who had never been to our house, immediately began describing it in detail. "There's a room that looks like a bedroom, but has a curio cabinet in it," Sue said, sounding perplexed. My mom explained that this was the living room, but when I came home, it became my room. Sue's response sent chills down my spine. Whoever sleeps in that room will never get a good night's sleep. That explained the restless nights I'd been having. Sue also described a closet in the house, the one with the water heater, saying, "That's where the spirit spends most of its time." It was the same closet that Smokey had been staring at for hours. Everything Sue said matched what we'd experienced. We were convinced that Sue was the real deal. We invited Sue over to cleanse the house. She spent hours communicating with the spirit, and after what seemed like a long process, she claimed to have shown it the light. Later, Sue revealed the identity of the spirit. Her name was Rose. She had been an 85-year-old woman, attached to the curio cabinet that had once been part of her estate. The cabinet, along with a matching table, had been sold separately at her estate sale. My mom had bought the cabinet, unknowingly bringing Rose's spirit into our home. Rose's dying wish had been for the cabinet and table to stay together, but after her passing, they were split up. Rose wasn't angry, but she was disappointed. She didn't approve of how my mom cleaned the cabinet. Apparently, it wasn't proper enough for her. She thought my parents were immature, and that my sister and I were spoiled brats. She even admitted to tormenting our cat, Smokey, believing that all animals belonged outside. Her haunting wasn't malicious, but it was rooted in her attachment to her possessions and her inability to move on. She couldn't let go of the material world, and that's what kept her spirit trapped. Fortunately, Sue was able to help Rose find peace, and after that, the house became peaceful again. To ensure that no other spirits would enter, we placed blessed herbs, provided by Sue, above every door in our home. It's been 4 years now, and not a single strange event has occurred since. I still feel a shiver run down my spine whenever I think back to this story. It's one I'll never forget. It all started as just another ordinary day. I worked for a home health agency, visiting patients and providing care, a job I genuinely enjoyed. On that day, the agency called me in and asked if I could cover a new patient. "Sure, where's the address?" I asked, grabbing my keys and heading out. When I arrived at the house, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was an old 2-story Victorian home on the outskirts of Pine Ridge, a small town just south of the city. As I approached the front door, I instinctively checked for any pets. No dogs, no cats, just silence. I knocked, and a woman answered. "Yes? Can I help you?" she asked kindly. I explained I was from the home health agency, and she welcomed me inside with a warm smile. We exchanged pleasantries as we stood near the entryway, chatting and getting to know one another. She explained that I'd be caring for her son. She seemed like a kind woman, and there was nothing unusual about the situation at first. But as I followed her inside, I began to notice something strange. Everywhere I looked, there were crucifixes, on the walls, the furniture, even on the floor in the hallway. It struck me as a bit excessive, but I said nothing. As a Catholic myself, I was used to seeing crucifixes around homes, though this seemed a bit extreme. She led me up the creaky wooden staircase to her son's room. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a chill in the air. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the draft of an old house. But when I met her son, I couldn't help but notice how pale he looked. He was a young man, but something about him didn't seem quite right. His eyes were sunken, his face gaunt. Despite the cold, I got to work, preparing to care for him as best I could. Over the next few weeks, I began noticing small, odd occurrences. The room never warmed up, no matter how high I turned up the heat. Books I brought for reading would mysteriously disappear, and when I'd search for them, they would turn up in odd places. These things were small, almost insignificant, but they made me uneasy. One morning, I arrived a little earlier than usual, hoping to speak with the mother about the strange things I had noticed. As I walked in, she invited me to sit down and offered me a cup of coffee. The conversation started as normal, but then she said something that took me completely by surprise. "I'm surprised you haven't asked me about all the crucifixes," she said, almost as if she had been waiting for me to ask. I admitted that I had wondered about them but didn't want to pry. She smiled slightly, her expression unreadable, and then dropped the bombshell. "We have a ghost," she said calmly, as if she were discussing the weather. "But don't worry, he won't hurt you. He actually likes the way you care for my son." I froze. Was she serious? Was she out of her mind? I tried to maintain my composure, thanking her for the coffee and politely changing the subject. But in my gut, I could feel something stirring, a feeling that wouldn't go away. The next morning, I was alone in the house while she ran some errands. I went into the kitchen to make breakfast for her son. As I opened the fridge to grab some eggs, something caught my attention. Across the room, a closet door slowly creaked open. The closet was near a long mirror, and as the door moved, I glanced at my reflection. That's when I saw it. A figure. A tall, white silhouette of a man stepped out from behind the door. I could see him clearly in the mirror, as if he were standing right in front of me. He turned his head, his hollow eyes locking with mine. And then, just as quickly as he appeared, he vanished. My heart raced, and before I knew it, I had dropped the eggs, the shell cracking on the floor. I ran to the patient's room, not thinking clearly, my hands trembling with fear. I sat by the bed, refusing to leave his side, too terrified to move. The minutes dragged on, and my mind raced with thoughts I couldn't make sense of. Then something even worse happened. The room grew colder, unbearably so. As I tucked the patient into bed, something caught my eye. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but there, on the far wall, two glowing eyes stared out from the shadows. They didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, but I forced myself to stay calm. I looked away, focusing on the book I was reading to the patient. My voice cracked as I read, the words barely audible through my trembling lips. I tried to stay calm, but my eyes kept flicking back to those glowing eyes. Eventually, they disappeared, but the feeling of being watched never left. When the mother returned, I could tell she knew something was wrong. She looked at my face and, without asking, simply said, "You're not coming back, are you?" I nodded, too shaken to say much, and I left without looking back. I never went back to that house. The memory still haunts me every time I pass by the old house on the outskirts of Pine Ridge. The windows are always dark, but I can never bring myself to look too closely. I don't know if it was a ghost or something else, but I do know that not everything in this world can be explained. When I was younger, my family lived in a house that I've always believed was haunted. We stayed there for 10 years before we finally moved out when I was around 10. The house was situated on a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by other homes, but looking back, it always seemed like something wasn't quite right in that neighborhood. For example, 2 of the 9 houses nearby burned down. It wasn't anything suspicious, no mysterious cause or anything like that, but it always felt like an unsettling stroke of bad luck. I was just a kid when the strange things started happening. I think I was about 5 or 6 when I first noticed it. One morning, I was getting ready for school, brushing my teeth, when I heard someone call my name, loud and clear. It only happened once, but what really shook me up was that the voice sounded just like my dad's. The problem? My dad wasn't even home. He was at work, and my mom was in the other room. The voice seemed to come from behind the bathroom toilet, and I can still remember how weird it felt. I was too young to understand what was going on, but even then, I knew something wasn't right. Soon, nightmares became part of my daily life. I remember being terrified of the hallway at night. It was pitch black, and I'd lie in bed, heart pounding, certain that something was lurking just beyond the shadows, waiting to step into the light. But the strange events started long before then. When I was around 3, something happened that my mom and brother still talk about. My brother, who was older, denies it now, but I remember the story well. One night he woke up screaming. My parents rushed into his room and found the hamster cage on the floor, knocked over. My brother claimed he'd woken up to the sound of the cage moving by itself. He said it looked like something was trying to lift it, but couldn't quite get a grip. According to him, the cage hovered in the air for a few seconds before falling to the floor. I wasn't there, so I can't confirm it, but it's a story that always stuck with me. There's one event, though, that I'll never forget. I was 10 years old, and we were getting ready to move out. My parents were getting a divorce, and the house was no longer home. One night, my dad and brother were in the family room, watching TV, some old show called 8 is Enough. I was in the living room, playing with a model glider when something caught my eye. I looked up and saw a strange blue light coming from the wall near the fireplace. It arced across the room, heading straight for me. As the light got closer, it changed. Right before it reached my head, it morphed into the shape of a skull. I froze. There was no way it could have been car headlights or something like that. Our front yard had a tall fence that blocked any light from the street, and the thick curtains were drawn shut. I've tried to make sense of it over the years, thinking there must be a logical explanation, but nothing adds up. I didn't imagine it, and I didn't make it up. Even now, years later, I still dream about that house. Sometimes, I hear my name called again, just like before, always in the voice of a family member. I wake up wondering if it's real or just a trick of my mind. I'm a believer in ghosts, but I'm still not sure if what I experienced back then was real or if it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. What do you think? Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. We were staying in a tent at a Keowa campground in Pine Lake, Texas, with our 3 kids when we noticed an old, weathered house on the outskirts of town. The moment I laid eyes on it, I felt an inexplicable pull to investigate. I called the real estate office managing the property, but when I asked about it, the agent told me the house wasn't for sale. That night, I turned to my husband and said, "I want that house." 2 days later, the same agent showed up at the campground. He looked exhausted as he walked toward me, and his words surprised me. "Do you still want that house?" I blinked and replied, "Oh yes, sir." He paused before saying, "You got it. Maybe now I can get some rest." His words caught me off guard, and before I could say anything, he continued, "Every night, I see your face in my dreams, and when I wake up, there you are again. Please just move in today." I was taken aback, but grateful, and still a little confused. Without giving it much thought, we moved into the house that very same day. For the first few weeks, everything felt normal. But then, around the 3rd week, I started hearing footsteps upstairs in the middle of the night. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone was pacing. I knew the kids were sound asleep, so I sent my husband to investigate. He found nothing. Soon, other strange occurrences began. We'd wake up to find the kitchen lights on and the back door wide open, even though I always made sure to lock it at night. At first, I blamed it on the kids, telling them to turn off the lights if they got up during the night, but they swore it wasn't them. That's when they admitted that they too had been hearing footsteps. None of us felt truly scared or in danger, so we just shrugged it off as one of those odd things we couldn't explain. But one night, I decided to face my fear. While the others slept, I concentrated on the footsteps. I wanted to know who, or what, was walking around. I sat in the quiet darkness, listening as the footsteps slowly descended the stairs, one step at a time. My heart raced. Just as they reached the bottom of the stairs, a chill ran down my spine. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and a wave of fear washed over me. I regretted my decision. I immediately began to pray. The footsteps stopped, but not before I saw something vivid in my mind. An image of a man in worn blue jeans and a sleeveless t-shirt, the kind with the arms cut off. I didn't see him with my eyes, but I felt him as if he were right there in the room. A few days later, I stopped by the little store across the street and chatted with the owners, who had become our friends. I asked if they knew anything about the house. They exchanged a long, uncomfortable glance before finally saying, "We thought you knew." "Knew what?" I asked, feeling a sense of dread creeping in. That's when they shared the story. The last tenants were a young couple who had been having serious problems. The wife decided to leave, taking their young child back to California. Heartbroken, the husband fell into a deep depression and started drinking heavily. One day, he took his motorcycle out for a ride with his dog. Tragically, he crashed into a logging truck and was killed instantly. Witnesses believed the crash was no accident. The pieces fell into place. The footsteps, the lights, the doors, it had to be him. We never understood what he wanted from us, but we learned that the crash had happened just weeks before we moved in. Some of their belongings were still in the house, which explained the agent's reluctance to rent it out. After hearing the story, we packed up and moved back to Texas. That was in 1989, but the strange events in that house have stayed with me. Sometimes I wonder if he's still there, still walking around, turning on lights, and opening doors for whoever lives there now. I've always been a fan of spooky stories and horror films, not because I believed in them, but because of the thrill of a good scare. That all changed about 10 years ago when I bought a little house in a small town in Oklahoma. Some things just can't be explained away. Now, as I get ready to sell the house and move across the country, I feel it's time to share my story. I moved into the modest one-story house with my 8-month-old son during a tough divorce. The house wasn't anything special, but it was something I could afford. It needed a lot of work, but for months, I scrubbed, painted, and gathered second-hand furniture to make it my own. Eventually, it became cozy, and I was proud of how far it had come. Despite all the effort, the house always felt warm and welcoming, almost as if it was happy to have us. Still, from the very beginning, strange things started happening. My car keys would vanish, sending me on frantic, futile searches. Then, just when I'd given up and muttered something like, "I didn't really want to go out anyway," they'd reappear in plain sight, often in places I'd already checked, like the kitchen counter. Once, I even found them in the fridge. It became a running joke in my family. Every time something went missing, we blamed the ghost. Even my parents had experienced the strange occurrences when they visited with their keys or small belongings disappearing, only to show up in weird spots. My son was too young to be the culprit, only 8 months old when it all started, and the playful nature of the incidents made it feel like we had a mischievous housemate. But as time went on, these pranks started taking on a more protective tone. One stormy evening, I was in the back of the house checking for leaks when I heard someone call my name. Thinking a neighbor had stopped by for shelter, I walked into the living room, but there was no one there. Just as I turned around, lightning struck a tree in the backyard, sending it crashing through the ceiling of the room I'd just been standing in. If I hadn't moved when I did, I might not be here telling you this story. As my son grew older, he began talking about the gray man. He'd say things like, "Look, Mommy, the gray man's there," or "I saw the gray man today." I brushed it off as an imaginary friend, something that many young kids have. But one night, I saw him too. I had just put my son to bed, leaving only the soft glow of his nightlight on. It cast a faint light into the hallway as I walked to my bedroom, thinking about which book to read. As I reached the door, I stopped, the way you do when you almost bump into someone. For a moment, I saw him. A man in a gray suit, a bowler hat, and a gold pocket watch, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, gently rocking on his heels. He looked at me with a kind smile, his bushy mustache twitching, as though he were studying me. And then he vanished. I wasn't scared, just completely stunned. I sat on the edge of my bed, replaying what I had just seen. The details, his hat, his watch, the way he slightly nodded his head before disappearing, were too vivid to be a trick of my imagination. I had to laugh when I realized that my first instinct, before I caught myself, was to say, "Excuse me." After that, the gray man's pranks slowed down, but now and then, I'd still find myself asking aloud, "Where are my keys?" Or, "Can I have my other shoe back now, please?" Unlike the ghost stories I'd loved growing up, there was nothing to fear in my house. The gray man's presence felt more like a guardian, looking out for my son and me. His pranks were harmless, if a little frustrating at times, and sometimes it even seemed like he was trying to be helpful. There were times when we'd leave the dog inside while we ran errands, only to return and find her outside. I could never figure out how she'd gotten there. No one else had a key, and all the windows and doors were locked. I like to think the gray man was just letting her out for a quick stroll. A few months ago, I got engaged, and that's when I knew it was time to sell a house. It wasn't an easy decision. As empty as the house feels now, it's still full of memories. Yesterday, as I packed up the last of the boxes, I stood in the living room and smiled. Despite the challenges of being a single mom in those early years, I always felt safe here, even with some sketchy neighbors and near accidents. Before leaving, I took a moment to look around. "Thank you," I whispered aloud. And I think he heard me, because just as the words left my mouth, the kitchen light bulbs blew out. Ever the prankster. I'll miss him. I've always prided myself on being a rational person, not someone who scares easily. But there was one experience back in the late 1970s that still haunts me to this day. I call it the farmer's tractor. At the time, I was living in a rundown farmhouse outside of Pine Lake, Georgia, with 2 roommates and 2 dogs, Molly, my Doberman, and Seamus, my roommate's German Shepherd. The house was isolated, surrounded by nothing but sprawling fields that eventually gave way to dense woods. It was the kind of place that seemed like it belonged in a rural postcard. A sagging barn, a rusty old tractor, and no neighbors for miles. Quiet, peaceful, and perfect for anyone looking to escape the noise of the world. One Friday morning, my roommates mentioned they were heading to the beach for the weekend and invited me to join. I turned them down, already making plans to hit a party with my friend Marty and his wife, Debbie. I baked a cake that morning, thinking we'd enjoy it later. My roommates left without touching it, so it was just me and the dogs for the rest of the day. The hours passed uneventfully, and by evening, Marty and Debbie showed up to pick me up. The party turned out to be a bust, so after a couple of drinks, we decided to head back. I suddenly remembered the cake and excitedly suggested we stop at my place for some coffee, cake, and a little TV. Everyone agreed, and we pulled into my gravel driveway just as the sky began to darken. That's when things took a strange turn. The driveway wound past the barn, with the old tractor sitting like a forgotten relic in the yard. As soon as we parked, Debbie stiffened, her eyes wide. She let out a soft gasp. When I asked what was wrong, she quickly brushed it off. "Nothing. I'm just not feeling well. Let's just go home," she said, her voice shaky. Marty tried to comfort her. "You're probably just hungry, Deb. Let's grab some cake and coffee, and we'll be fine." He hopped out of the car, and I made my way to the back door. But when I turned to look, Debbie was clinging to Marty as if she were afraid of something, and he was practically dragging her toward the house. Inside, she looked pale, her hands trembling. "Debbie, you don't look good. Do you want something else instead of cake? A sandwich, maybe?" I asked, concerned. She locked eyes with me and whispered, "No, thanks. I have a headache." Or, "Maybe it's my stomach. Marty, can we please just go home?" Marty and I exchanged confused glances. Her behavior was odd, but we chalked it up to a little too much alcohol at the party. As Marty grabbed a plate of cake to take with him, Debbie became more insistent. "No, Dana can bring us some in the morning. Let's just go now," she nearly shouted. Finally, I gave in. I told Marty to take her home, and off they went. I shook my head, still trying to figure out what had happened. Deciding to let it go, I let the dogs out, brewed some coffee, and sat down with a book. By the time I turned off most of the lights and climbed into bed, it was nearly 11 p.m. Molly and Seamus were curled up on the floor beside me. That's when the nightmare began. I was just about to drift off when Molly began growling low, a deep, guttural sound. Seamus joined in, his growls matching hers. Both dogs were on high alert, their fur standing on end as they stared at the kitchen. They edged toward the doorway, their teeth bared. Before I could even move, they erupted into a frantic barking frenzy and sprinted back toward me, their eyes wide with terror. Suddenly, I felt a weight land on my lap. It was heavy, too heavy for anything that should be there. The pressure was so intense that I could barely breathe, as if someone or something was pinning me to the bed. The dogs continued their frantic barking, snapping at the air just inches above me, their teeth gnashing in desperation. Molly jumped onto the bed, biting at something invisible, while Seamus paced around the room, his growls low and threatening. I tried to move, but the pressure only increased. It felt like two legs swung onto the bed, adding more weight to my chest, forcing me into an uncomfortable position. My heart raced, and I struggled to breathe as I tried to claw at the air, screaming for help that would never come. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the weight suddenly lifted. The dogs bolted from the room, their barking echoing through the house. I stumbled after them, fumbling to unlock the door. When I threw it open, they shot out into the night, racing toward the barn. I followed them with my eyes, and through the window, I saw it, an eerie, greenish-blue glow near the tractor, hovering for a moment before vanishing into the darkness. The dogs were wild with fury, barking and snarling at the barn as if they had something cornered. I stood frozen, watching them from the window, too afraid to move. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. Molly and Seamus returned to the door, their tails between their legs, whining and sniffing around the yard, as if the source of their terror had vanished. I let them inside, locked the door, and collapsed into a chair, trembling uncontrollably. Still shaken, I called Marty and demanded to know what had happened to Debbie earlier. After some coaxing, she admitted that she had seen a figure, a man in old farm clothes, standing near the tractor. His eyes were filled with such anger that it terrified her, but she hadn't said anything, thinking we'd laugh it off. The next morning, I spoke to a farmer nearby. He wasn't shocked by my story. He told me that the original owner of the farm was a cruel, possessive man who loved his tractor more than anything. Even when he became too frail to use it, he would visit the barn every day to care for it. He died in my bedroom years ago. For some reason, his ghost chose that night to make an appearance, and never again. My roommates stayed in the house for years without incident, but Debbie never came back, and I'll never forget the terror I felt that night. Why it happened, I'll never know. Maybe something in the stars aligned, or perhaps we stirred something that had been lying dormant for decades. All I know for sure is that there are things in this world that simply cannot be explained. When my husband and I got married, my mother-in-law gave us a little black poodle pup as a wedding gift. We named him Max, and he became my closest friend during the early years of our marriage. He was playful, loving, and incredibly loyal. Every morning, after my husband left for work, Max would jump up onto the bed to keep me company. The bed was pretty high, so I always had to give him a hand. lifting him by his rear end to get him up. Once there, he would settle down at the foot of the bed, and we both doze for a few more hours in peaceful silence. One morning, as usual, I reached down sleepily to help him up. But instead of the usual playful wiggle, Max let out a spine-chilling howl. Shocked, I tried again, but this time I couldn't get a grip on him. When I finally opened my eyes, I froze in terror. His back half was gone. Completely gone. Max whined weakly, using only his front paws to drag himself under the bed. My heart raced as a wave of panic washed over me, and tears blurred my vision. I couldn't bring myself to look under the bed immediately, paralyzed by the fear of what I might find. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself onto the floor and crawled closer. Trembling, I peered under the bed, but he wasn't there. Suddenly, I heard his familiar bark outside, and I bolted to the kitchen. The screen door was tightly shut, but there Max stood, on the other side, wagging his tail, whole, healthy, and happy. I was flooded with relief as I opened the door and let him in, but something deep inside me couldn't shake the dread that still lingered. When my husband came home that night, he assured me it was just a vivid nightmare, some weird projection of my subconscious telling me that Max wanted to come back inside. It was a logical explanation, and after some time, I tried to convince myself that it was just an overactive imagination. Life went back to normal, and the fear faded into the background. But weeks later, as I stood at the sink washing dishes one evening, I heard that same awful howl again. The sound cut through me like a knife, bringing all the fear from that morning rushing back. I dropped everything and rushed outside, my heart pounding in my chest. Halfway up the driveway, I saw Max lying motionless on the ground. He wasn't howling anymore. Instead, he was whimpering softly, dragging himself with just his front paws. His back half hung limp and unmoving. My heart sank. My mother-in-law's car was parked nearby. She had just arrived. She rushed out of the car in a panic, and together we gently lifted Max into her car to take him to the vet. At the clinic, the vet confirmed my worst fears. Max's spine had been severed, and his back was broken beyond repair. He would never walk again. The vet explained that Max wasn't in pain. The severed nerves had left him unable to feel anything. To him, the vet said softly, "It's like he doesn't even have a back half." His words sent a chill down my spine. They echoed the image from that morning weeks ago, the vivid dream I had brushed off as nothing. My heart ached as I realized what I had seen wasn't just a nightmare. It had been a warning, a glimpse of what was to come. As much as I didn't want to, I knew I couldn't let Max live that way. It broke my heart, but I made the hardest decision of my life. I said my tearful goodbyes and stroked his soft fur one last time before the vet put him to sleep. Even now, I think of Max often. I can still feel the warmth of his presence beside me, the way he'd curl up at my feet on cold nights. And though I've never been able to explain that strange premonition, I've come to believe that, in some way, it was his way of preparing me for the heartbreaking reality that followed. In 1991, when I was just 15 years old, I had an experience that changed my life in ways I still can't fully explain. It's something I don't talk about often because, honestly, it sounds too unbelievable. But it happened, and it taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Some doors are meant to stay closed. It all began innocently. A few close friends and I found an old Ouija board in the back of a dusty secondhand store, hidden away among other forgotten items. At first, we thought it was just a silly game, nothing more than a way to pass the time. We had no idea what we were inviting into our lives. We sat down one evening in my friend Sarah's basement, the room lit only by the dim flicker of an old lamp. We began moving the planchette, laughing off the tension in the air, convinced it was just a trick of our own making. But slowly, something changed. The board seemed to hum, as if it had a life of its own. We started getting responses, strange, specific responses, from spirits that seemed to know intimate details about our lives. At first, we were excited, even intrigued, but as the sessions continued, the tone shifted. One evening, the board spelled out a name. My older brother, Nathaniel, my mother's first child who had died just days after birth. He was someone I had only heard about in whispers, a subject that was never discussed in our family. To test the spirit, I asked, "Where is Nathaniel buried?" The board spelled out the name of a cemetery on the edge of town, the same cemetery where my father's side of the family was buried. I was skeptical, but something about it felt too real to ignore. I mentioned it to my mother the next day. Her face went pale when I described what had happened. She called the cemetery, and to my shock, they had a record of my brother being buried there. She wanted to go, so we drove out the next weekend. The moment we arrived, I knew it was the right place. The grave was unmarked, overgrown with weeds, and scattered with old, wilting flowers. It was exactly how the spirit had described it. I was shaken. This wasn't just a coincidence. That discovery hooked me. I was desperate to know more. I began to experiment with the Ouija board on my own, holding private seances late at night, trying to contact other spirits. I thought I had control, but I didn't, and I didn't realize how far I had gone until it was too late. One afternoon, I came home from school, tossed my bag on the floor, and collapsed onto my bed. As I lay there, I felt different. My arms twitched. My hands jerked. My head began to move on its own, twisting uncontrollably. I tried to stop it, but my body wasn't responding. Then I heard it, voices. At first, it was like faint whispers in the back of my mind. But soon, it grew louder, chaotic chatter, as though a crowd was swirling in my head, all speaking at once. My thoughts weren't my own. It was as if my mind was no longer a safe place. I tried to shake it off, but the sensation was overwhelming. It felt like something had settled inside me, something that was here to stay. One voice stood out among the rest, cold, mocking. "I'm here now, and you can't get rid of me." I froze. It wasn't just the voices. It was the way my body felt, as if it was no longer mine to control. I was terrified. I tried to tell my parents, but they didn't understand. They could see the changes in me, how I wasn't myself anymore. I was distant, distracted, and I couldn't stop moving. My limbs jerked on their own. I was a puppet on strings, and something was pulling the cords. We saw doctors, therapists. Nothing helped. They put me on medication, but it only dulled the edges of the nightmare. It didn't take it away. Desperate, my mother contacted a local priest. I remember him standing in front of me, muttering prayers as he sprinkled holy water over my body. But the moment the water touched my skin, I felt it. Something dark, something angry. It laughed. It mocked the priest, the ritual. And that's when I knew. No one could help me. Not the doctors. Not the priests. I had to fight this on my own. For weeks I fought back. In my mind, I built a barrier, strong, solid, something that nothing could penetrate. Every time my head jerked or my limbs moved against my will, I focused all my energy on keeping still, keeping control. It fought back, threatening me, warning me of the consequences for my family. It was like a storm crashing against a wall, but I held my ground. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but eventually it worked. Slowly, the voices began to fade. My body stopped moving on its own. I took back control. I went back to school after 3 long months, though I was a shadow of the person I used to be. It took time, but I rebuilt myself. I healed, physically, emotionally, but I never forgot what happened. Today, I live a quiet, ordinary life, but I still sense things, feel things. I dream about things before they happen, and I can still do automatic writing if I choose. I won't though. I haven't touched a Ouija board since that day. It's a part of me, a part of my past that I've chosen not to revisit. What happened to me? Was it a spirit? A breakdown of some kind? I may never know. But I do know this. Some things are real, and they don't let go easily. If you ever open a door to the unknown, be sure you know what you're doing. Some doors are better left closed. It was mid-September, late at night, and I was alone in my small apartment in Pine Lake. The town was quiet, typical of this time of year when the weather starts to cool, and the air takes on a crisp, almost eerie quality. I wasn't feeling especially tired, so I decided to fix up an old chair that had been giving me trouble. Its arm kept falling off, and I figured I'd finally get around to fixing it, even though I wasn't all that motivated. Just one of those things you do when you can't sleep but aren't ready to go to bed. I was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, barefoot, struggling with the loose arm. As I worked, I glanced at the clock. The digital display flicked over from 11:59 to 12 o'clock, midnight. I didn't think much of it and returned to my task, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that crept in as I concentrated. A moment later, I glanced at the clock again. It read 12:10. I blinked, staring at the time in disbelief. Had I zoned out that much? 10 minutes had just vanished. My mind raced to catch up. Feeling a little off-kilter, I glanced over at the old VCR clock on the bookshelf. It read 12:11. Both clocks matched perfectly, but it felt like no time had passed at all. Weird, I thought. Maybe I'm just more tired than I realized. I stood up to prepare for bed, but as soon as I got to my feet, a wave of dizziness hit me. For a brief, disorienting moment, I felt like I was in a completely unfamiliar place, my own apartment, but completely foreign, like I didn't belong. It was gone as quickly as it came, but I still felt off balance as I shook it off, blaming exhaustion. That's when I noticed it. My left foot was bleeding. There was a small pool of blood on the carpet, soaking into the fibers. A chill ran through me as I crouched down to inspect it. The wound was about the size of a pencil eraser, deep and angled, like something had punctured my foot at an odd slant. It wasn't painful, but the blood continued to drip freely. I grabbed my first aid kit, cleaned the wound, and wrapped it up in a few bandages. Once the bleeding stopped, I scoured the carpet for any clues. I couldn't find anything sharp on the floor, nothing that could explain a puncture wound like that. The carpet was clean, just as I'd vacuumed earlier that day. I tried to convince myself I had missed something, but the whole thing didn't sit right with me. I tried to push it to the back of my mind, telling myself it was just a fluke. I turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and curled up, hoping sleep would come. But just as I was drifting off, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was subtle but undeniable, like a strange pressure. The air grew both colder and warmer at the same time, and the room seemed to close in on me. A flash of heat washed over me, followed by an intense, creeping chill. I froze, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. My back was turned to the rest of the room, and a terrible sense of being watched washed over me. It wasn't just a vague feeling. It felt as though someone was standing just beside my bed, breathing down my neck. My skin prickled, and the hairs on my neck stood up. My rational mind tried to talk me out of it. It's just your imagination, I thought. But what if it wasn't? What if someone had broken in? My heart pounded as I turned around, expecting to see an intruder. The room was empty. Relieved but still uneasy, I got up to check the apartment. All the windows and doors were locked. Everything was as it should be. But there was still that lingering feeling, that sense that something wasn't right. I climbed back into bed, trying to ignore the irrational fear creeping over me. The moment my head hit the pillow, the feeling returned, stronger than before. It was like something, or someone, was standing too close to me. My foot began to throb painfully, sharp and insistent. I flicked on the bedside lamp, my hands shaking. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty room. Nothing moved. Nothing explained the sensation of being watched. I stayed awake for hours, too terrified to close my eyes. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep, despite the oppressive presence that seemed to linger just out of sight. The next morning, I woke up to find that the presence was gone. My foot had stopped hurting, and the wound had scabbed over neatly. The apartment felt like it always had, normal, empty, untouched. But the memories of that night still haunt me. The missing 10 minutes, the inexplicable wound, the overwhelming sense of being watched, like something unseen had been standing there all along. It's a mystery I've never been able to shake, and I still wonder what really happened that night. Could it have been a strange coincidence? Or was it something far worse? Something I can't quite explain. This is a story that still sends chills down my spine, even after 15 years. It's not your usual ghost story, but one I'll never forget. My husband's grandmother on his father's side, Grandma Evelyn, passed away in the late 1980s. She'd been battling diabetes and some other health issues. In the years my husband and I had been married, we only visited her a handful of times, far fewer than we should have. Life always seemed to get in the way, or at least, that's what we told ourselves. One quiet afternoon, my husband was lying on the living room floor, watching TV while our kids napped. It was one of those rare, peaceful moments where everything felt right, and soon he drifted off to sleep. I was sitting on the couch, enjoying the silence, when suddenly he started making the most heartbreaking sounds in his sleep, low, mournful wails that made my skin crawl. It sounded as if his heart were breaking. Alarmed, I shook him, but he wouldn't wake up. Realizing there wasn't much I could do, I let him sleep, hoping he'd wake up on his own. 45 minutes later, he sat up suddenly, tears streaming down his face. "We need to go see Grandma Evelyn," he said, his voice desperate. "What's wrong? What happened?" I asked, startled. At first, he wouldn't tell me, brushing off my questions, but I pressed him until he finally explained. In his dream, his late grandfather had appeared to him. His grandfather warned that if my husband didn't visit Grandma Evelyn within the next 2 weeks, it would be too late. She would pass away before he had a chance to see her again. Shaken but resolute, we decided we would go visit her the following Sunday. That evening, my husband called to check in. Grandma Evelyn answered with her usual cheerful tone, sounding as lively as ever. He told her we'd be visiting soon, and she said she was looking forward to it, adding that we really should visit more often. They chatted for a while before hanging up. In the days that followed, the urgency of the dream began to fade. It started to feel less like a warning and more like an overactive imagination. That Sunday, as had happened before, life got in the way. My husband, worn out from his long hauls as a truck driver, decided he wasn't up for the drive. We called Grandma Evelyn to make our excuses. Disappointed but understanding, she forgave us. We promised we'd visit the next Sunday. The same thing happened again the next week. My husband, exhausted from his work, decided to stay home. Once more, we postponed our visit. Then came the call. It was Tuesday morning when I answered the phone, and I heard my husband's aunt on the other end. Her voice was trembling as she told me that Grandma Evelyn had passed away peacefully in her sleep the night before. My stomach sank as I realized the dream had come true. When my husband returned home later that evening, I sat him down to tell him the news. The color drained from his face as the dream rushed back to him, as vivid as the day it happened. He was devastated, the weight of guilt crashing over him. "I should have gone," he whispered over and over again. For years, he carried that guilt, believing he had failed her. Even now, whenever we talk about his grandmother or his childhood, I can see the sadness in his eyes. He remembers the dream vividly, and the regret still lingers. Grandma Evelyn passed away exactly 2 weeks and 1 day after my husband's dream. Whether it was a warning or a message from the other side, it's a story we'll never forget. I've been experiencing strange encounters with the supernatural for as long as I can remember. Now, at 21 and in college, these encounters have only gotten more intense, and they've been particularly unnerving in the house my parents bought 2 years ago. My mom has always had a thing for old houses. She buys them, renovates them, and then sells them off a year or 2 later. She usually asks me to come along on house hunting trips to see if I can sense anything unusual. But with this particular house, I wasn't able to join her. Looking back, I really wish I had. Just a week after my parents moved in, the strange happenings began. The first night I stayed up late in the living room, feeling a little uneasy. As I started to drift off on the couch, I heard the unmistakable sound of a little girl laughing, echoing down the hallway. I first thought it was probably just the neighbor's kids playing. but the laughter grew louder and closer. It was coming from the downstairs hallway, which I could see from where I was lying. I shifted, trying to get more comfortable, but then froze. Standing in the hallway was a little girl, her face twisted in a grimace, like she had an injury on her chin. Before I could even move, she vanished right in front of my eyes. 2 nights later, I was asleep in my new room when I suddenly felt hands running through my hair. My heart stopped, and I jumped upright, turning on the light. There was nothing there. I was shaken, but I turned the light back off and tried to fall asleep. Moments later, I felt it again. Hands, but this time they were kneading the bed as if something was getting comfortable, like a cat. That was the final straw. I grabbed a blanket and spent the rest of the night sleeping on the floor in my parents' bedroom. Imagine being 19 years old and still needing to sleep beside your parents because you're too scared to be alone. Now, 2 years later, the house still hosts nightly encounters. There are 3 distinct presences, each with its own personality. The first is an older woman. She's the most mischievous, and honestly, I think she dislikes me. On my 21st birthday, after celebrating with friends, I stumbled home and flicked on the light by the back door. In an instant, the bulb exploded. Startled, I rushed into the kitchen and turned on the lights there, only for them to immediately go out as well. So there I was, 21 years old, a little tipsy, sitting on the kitchen floor in the dark, yelling for my mom and dad to come help. She's also taken to harassing my mom. One day, while my mom was outside gardening, she came in to get a glass of water and heard a loud crash from the kitchen. She rushed in and found several of her favorite dishes shattered on the floor. Oddly, 4 of her most cherished plates and red china cups were left untouched, sitting perfectly on top of the wreckage, like someone had placed them there deliberately. The shelf hadn't collapsed, and nothing else in the kitchen was disturbed. As my mom stood there trying to make sense of it, she saw the old woman walking toward the stairs. The woman turned her head as if to mock her and then vanished. Next is the little girl. She usually hangs around the stairs and the upstairs foyer. Her presence is more sorrowful than evil. She often calls my name at night, pleading for help. I suspect she may have had an accident near the stairs, as she's always close to them. One morning, as I was coming down, I noticed something scratched into the wooden banister. It hadn't been there before. Curious, my mom and I did a pencil rubbing to try to decipher the message. It read, "Spirit who be put in hall like you all, SAL." To this day, we have no idea what it means. The third is an older man who seems harmless but is still unsettling in his own way. His presence is strongest in the basement and the back hall. He rarely interacts with me directly, but he sends me vivid, disturbing dreams about the house. They're so unsettling that I avoid going to the basement by myself at all costs. With 3 spirits sharing one house, every visit home feels like a supernatural circus. 1 ghost? I can handle that. But 3? That's a bit much. The last time I saw my grandfather, Mike, was at my cousin's wedding. He had been battling illness for a while, and while we all knew his time was running out, nothing could really prepare us for the moment when it finally came. As he stood to leave the wedding early, something inside me urged me to go and say goodbye. It felt like my last chance. That feeling, it turned out, was right. He passed away a month later. Grandpa Mike wasn't an easy man. In his prime, he had a harsh temper, and it left deep scars on my mom and aunt, not to mention my grandmother. After years of tension, my grandmother finally left him, and their lives seemed to improve from that point. But Grandpa Mike never apologized for the pain he caused, even on his deathbed. It was as if there was something in him, a weight he couldn't ever shake, even after passing. About a year after his death, things started to feel off. I'd get this strange sensation, like someone had just walked right behind me. But when I'd turn around, no one would be there. Sometimes, when I'd be on my laptop late at night, I could feel a presence, someone standing just behind me, watching. It wasn't terrifying, just unsettling. And at night, I'd hear soft footsteps, like someone walking across the floor. The sound was so clear, slow, deliberate, moving from the kitchen down the hallway, past my bedroom, and toward my mom's room. I couldn't explain it, but I just knew it was him. When I'd feel his presence, it always carried a kind of sadness, like a deep regret he never got the chance to express when he was alive. It was as if he was looking for something he couldn't find, a forgiveness he hadn't asked for but was desperately searching for. One night, when everyone else had gone to bed, I found myself sitting in the living room alone. The house was still, and the air was thick with that familiar heaviness. I spoke into the silence, calling out to him, "Grandpa, are you here?" The moment I said it, it felt like he was sitting there beside me, in the old rocking chair by the fireplace. I couldn't see him, but I could feel him. I told him what I thought he needed to hear. I told him that he didn't belong here anymore. This world was no place to find peace, and that forgiveness wasn't something that could be forced from others. It had to come from within. I said that whatever was waiting for him on the other side, it was time to go there. It was time to let go and move on. As I spoke, the air seemed to shift. That heavy weight that had been hanging in the room lifted, and the presence, which had lingered for so long, slowly faded. Since that night, I haven't felt him around. It's as if he found what he needed and was finally at peace. Wherever he is now, I hope he's found the redemption he couldn't reach in life. I had always heard rumors about the summer camp being haunted. Over the years, the older campers would share eerie stories, but nothing ever happened to me, until that summer. What I experienced on a hot August night was far too real to dismiss as nerves or coincidence. It was the night of August 5th, and everything seemed perfectly normal. The girls in my cabin were hanging out, sprawled across bunks, laughing and swapping stories, some funny, some a little unsettling. The mood was lighthearted, and after a while, we all settled down to sleep around 1:00 a.m. A few hours later, I woke up suddenly, the need to use the restroom pulling me from my dreams. Not wanting to wake anyone, I quietly slipped on my flip-flops and crept outside. The bathhouse was about 100 yards away, and the campgrounds were eerily quiet, save for the steady chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. The trip to the bathhouse was uneventful, but on my way back to the cabin, something caught my eye. About 300 yards up the dirt road, near the edge of a clearing, I saw a strange, smoky mist. At first, I thought it was just the fog settling in or light playing through the trees. But as I watched, the mist began to shift and take form. I couldn't look away. Curiosity tugged at me, stronger than my fear. Slowly, the mist morphed into the shape of a figure, a tall, semi-transparent figure. My heart skipped a beat as I realized it was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. Her figure was like smoke, almost solid but still faint enough to see through. Instead of bolting back to the cabin, like I always imagined I would if something like this ever happened, I found myself walking toward her. As I neared, the woman lifted her arm and pointed toward the woods to the right of the clearing. Then she motioned for me to follow. It didn't feel like a choice. I was drawn to her, as if under a spell. I walked after her into the trees, even though there wasn't a path, no sign that anyone had walked here in years. She led me only a short distance into the woods before stopping by a tree. Without a word, she disappeared. I stood there, frozen, until something small and shiny caught my eye at the base of the tree. It was a silver whistle. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. I didn't know why, but it felt important. Tucking it into my pajama pocket, I slowly made my way back to the clearing, then back to the cabin. I glanced at the clock as I climbed back into bed. It was 2:30 a.m. Exhausted, I quickly fell asleep. The next morning, as I changed out of my pajamas, the whistle slipped from my pocket and landed on the floor with a clatter. The memory of the ghostly woman and the walk into the woods came rushing back. Confused and a little shaken, I decided to show the whistle to one of the counselors, a woman who had worked at the camp for over 20 years. When she saw the whistle, her face dropped. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and disbelief, and asked where I had found it. I explained everything, the misty figure, the walk through the woods, and how the whistle had been lying beneath a tree. Tears welled up in her eyes as she told me a story I never expected. Years ago, when she was a camper, her mother, who had been a counselor, had been attacked in those same woods. The whistle had belonged to her mother, a tool she used to call for help when she was in trouble. The counselor explained that she believed her mother's spirit had guided me to the whistle as a way of sending a message that she had found peace at last. The revelation left me shaken, but there was also a strange sense of comfort in it. In that quiet moment in the woods, the woman I had seen had managed to send her daughter a message of closure, of forgiveness, and of peace. I'd always heard the stories about the old house, stories of its dark and oppressive energy, but living through it, that was something I never could have prepared for. The experiences my family and I had there are still with me years after we moved out. What we endured in that house wasn't just a string of creepy events. It felt like the house itself had power over us, twisting our lives and trying to tear us apart. It was a cold autumn night when it all began. My friend and I were waiting in my room for my sister to come home. We clearly heard the back door creak open, the sound of quick footsteps running up the stairs, and the bathroom door slam shut. We sat there for a while, waiting for her to come out, but after some time she never did. Curiosity finally got the best of me, and I went to check, only to find the bathroom empty. My sister hadn't even come home. Strange things like this became routine. We'd hear the sound of the bathtub faucet turning on, or the shower running, yet no one was upstairs. At first, we brushed it off, but after a while, it was hard to ignore. The eerie sounds became a constant, always unsettling, but never quite explained. One night, while I was asleep, I was awoken by a soft, sing-song voice calling my name from the shadows. "Carrie, it's time to play." I remember feeling groggy, disoriented from the sleep, and I muttered back, "No, it's not," before falling back into a deep slumber. In the morning, I realized how bizarre it was, but in the moment, I was too tired to react to it. Looking back, I wish I had, but back then, it felt too surreal to even process. The house didn't just have strange occurrences, it had a way of creeping into your thoughts. When we were preparing to sell, I remember walking through the house with potential buyers. They casually talked about all the changes they'd make to improve the place. I couldn't stand it. All I could think was, get out of my house. Even though I wanted to leave, the idea of someone else stepping into that house felt unbearable. A few months ago, I decided to drive by and see what had become of the place. The new owners had remodeled it, but something about it still felt off. My friend and I made our way up the path, passing through a fenced yard where a large German shepherd usually roamed. It had a reputation for being aggressive and protective, but oddly, the dog wasn't there. We rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. As we walked back toward the truck, I glanced up at the window of my old room. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at it, as though the house itself had a hold on me. I had to force myself to leave. We came back a few days later, and this time, the dog was there, barking viciously at every noise we made. It was almost as though the house had wanted me to come inside before, but now it was warning me away. That thought still chills me to my core. The house didn't just affect us. It terrified everyone who came over too. One of my sister's friends was staying the night when she saw what she described as a claw reaching for her face. She ducked just in time, letting out a scream I initially dismissed as just the alcohol kicking in. Later, though, she showed me a scratch on the headboard of the bed, right where she claimed the claw had slashed. The mark is still there, on the same headboard my mother now sleeps on. Another friend went upstairs to change, and seconds later, she was running back down, shouting that something had grabbed her arm. When we looked, a long, deep scratch was bleeding across her skin. But it wasn't just our guests. The house gave me nightmares, horrible, terrifying dreams. I dreamed that I was lifted off the ground, spun around the room, and then violently thrown into the walls. It felt so real, as if the house itself was attacking me in my sleep. One night, we had a group of friends over. One of my brother's friends suddenly collapsed, struggling to breathe. When he recovered from an asthma attack, he grabbed a piece of paper and began drawing. The picture was disturbing, evil, even. My sister, almost on instinct, grabbed a Bible and opened it at random. The words she read described exactly what was in the drawing. I'll never forget that moment, how it felt like the house had revealed itself through him. Sometimes we hear loud noises, doors slamming, dishes breaking, but when my dad went to check, everything would be exactly where it was supposed to be. One night, my friend and I heard dragging noises coming from above. We ran outside and started shouting, "In the name of Jesus, I command you to be gone." As we stood there, a stray cat appeared, acting strangely. It hissed and meowed wildly, following us around the house like it was trying to guide us away from the danger. Eventually, we left and stayed at my friend's house until my parents returned. That house wasn't just haunted, it was oppressive. It tried to tear apart everything we believed in, everything we had as a family. I'm thankful we left when we did. If we had stayed any longer, I don't think we'd still be close. To anyone who's living through something similar, I can only say this: leave. It's hard, but staying isn't worth it. Whatever was in that house wasn't just a presence. It was pure evil. And while I've moved on, a part of me still feels like that house has a grip on me that will never quite let go. Have you ever experienced something like this? Something that left you questioning whether the place itself was alive, feeding on fear, pulling you in until you could no longer escape? Maybe some things just have a hold on you forever. Sometimes I think about the strange things that happen in the world, things that can't be easily explained. I wouldn't call myself a full-on believer, but I've had my share of weird moments. Lights flickering for no reason, footsteps echoing when no one's around, and shadows moving out of the corner of my eye. Just little things, you know? I've always tried to approach it logically. If I can't find a reasonable explanation, I just tell myself it's something we don't fully understand yet. But what happened to me in the fall of 1996? That's something I still can't explain. Life wasn't easy back then. I had just lost my job, and my wife wasn't working either. We were both struggling with alcoholism. We had barely a couple $100 to our names, so we decided to leave the city and head out to a small cabin in the woods. It was near my wife's hometown of Pine Lake, a quiet town in upstate New York. The area's got its share of history, old battlefields from the Revolutionary War, forgotten cemeteries, and places where strange things have been rumored to happen. One afternoon, while I was digging up some ground to plant vegetables for the winter, I came across something that stopped me cold. At first, I thought it was just an old rock, but then I realized it was something much worse. It was a grave. I unearthed a skull, followed by more bones, and even a few old metal objects, a rusted belt buckle, a helmet, and an ID tag. I cleaned it off, and the name was clear: Thomas Gray. He was a soldier, a man who fought in the Civil War. Now, as a veteran of the Army and someone who had lost family in past wars, I felt a responsibility to do the right thing. When we got back to town, I decided to take the remains to a local pastor, someone who could help me contact a veterans group, or maybe even find his family. Maybe, just maybe, someone out there could find some peace. Life didn't get much better after that. My wife and I kept on drinking, and things only seemed to spiral further out of control. But then, in November of 1997, something happened that changed everything. It was late at night. I was sitting at the kitchen table, deep into my second bottle of cheap whiskey, talking to my cat, when I heard a voice, a deep, heavy voice with a thick German accent. "Chris, what is wrong with you?" I looked up, and there he was, a tall man, probably in his late 30s, with reddish-brown hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a gray sweater, old military boots, and a faded camouflage jacket. He didn't look threatening, though. Oddly, I wasn't scared. Maybe it was the booze, or maybe it was because he didn't seem like a ghost or anything. My first thought was, if this guy's here for a drink, he's gonna have to buy the next round himself. We talked. He refused the whiskey but accepted a cigarette. He told me I was wasting my life, that I was destroying myself. Then, in a moment that shook me, he said, "If you don't help yourself, no one can help you." His blunt words cut through the fog in my mind. He didn't feel like a stranger. In fact, it almost felt like he cared. Before he left, he told me to go to bed and start living a better life. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:43 a.m. and stumbled to bed, trying to make sense of it all. When I woke up later, I was drenched in sweat. I asked my wife, "What happened to the soldier?" She just mumbled, "What soldier?" The clock read 3:04 a.m., and I brushed it off as another sign of my withdrawals, telling myself it was time to get some help. And that's what we did. My wife and I both joined AA, and by the grace of God, I've been sober ever since. But I didn't really think about that strange encounter again until last week, when we were back at the cabin in Pine Lake. I was sitting by the fireplace, reading while my wife slept on the rug. That's when I heard it. Footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and an axe, thinking it was just a local coming to mess with our garden. I slipped outside, heart racing, and crept around the house, ready to confront whoever it was. But when I reached the garden, there was nothing, just an empty patch of land. I started to turn back, but then I felt it, a chill that ran through my entire body. I turned around and froze. Standing there, right in the yard, was a soldier. He wore a faded camouflage jacket, boots caked in dirt, and a helmet that looked like it had been worn through 100 battles. He had a machine gun slung over his shoulder, and grenades were tucked into his boots. His eyes locked with mine, and for a moment, I could smell him. Sweat, leather, tobacco, and fresh earth. And then I knew. It was him. The man from the kitchen. The one who had talked to me that night. He smiled, gave me a small wave, and then, just like that, vanished into the air. I believe it was Thomas Gray, the soldier I had found all those years ago. Maybe he came back because I had given him a proper burial. Maybe he returned to help me change my life. Either way, I think that final visit was his way of saying goodbye, of finally finding peace after all those years. Rest in peace, Thomas. If anyone owes a debt, it's me. This story isn't mine, but it belongs to a close family friend named Leanne. At the time, she was 32, single, and thrilled to have bought her first house in a small town just outside of Denver, Colorado. It was a quaint, two-story house perched on a hill, with a view of the valley below. The homes in the area were spaced out, offering plenty of privacy. After years of cramped apartment living, Leanne reveled in the peace and space. When she bought the house, she'd heard whispers that it might be haunted, but she brushed them off. She was ready to embrace a new chapter, new job, new home, and a fresh start. Leanne moved in during late August, choosing a bedroom on the main floor with a large window that framed the perfect view of the valley. But when she tried to place her piano and beloved parrot, Nibbles, in the room, they didn't quite fit. So she set them up in the basement instead. The piano took up one corner, with Nibbles' cage and jungle gym nearby. It felt just right to her. For the first couple of months, everything was fine. Leanne loved her new job and the beauty of living in the Colorado foothills. However, the house began to feel too quiet, too empty. Used to the constant hum of apartment life, the silence in the house was almost oppressive. The isolation started to weigh on her, and she began to think about renting out the basement room. But before making any decisions, she thought it best to sleep there herself for a few nights, to get a feel for the space. One evening, Leanne grabbed her blanket and pillow and set up a makeshift bed in the basement. The mattress was positioned in a corner, facing a walk-in closet with a carousel-style clothes rack. From the bed, she could see a portion of Nibbles' cage and a sliver of her piano in the adjacent room. After feeding Nibbles, she settled in for the night. She woke with a start in the middle of the night. Normally a deep sleeper, Leanne couldn't figure out what had jolted her awake. Something just didn't feel right. There was a faint banging noise coming from the closet. Nibbles, usually calm at night, was fluttering about, agitated. Leanne decided to check the closet first. Her heart raced as she stood up and opened the door. Her clothes were spinning on the carousel rack, as if someone had just pushed it. She froze, staring at the sight. After a long, tense moment, she cautiously stepped forward, scanning the closet and the room, but it was empty. No one was there. Trying to calm herself, Lean reasoned it might have been the air conditioning or something she had done earlier, forgotten in the haze of sleep. But then she thought about Nibbles. She hurried to his cage. As she approached, she saw him darting frantically around the bars, slamming into the sides of his cage, and repeatedly saying, "Oh, oh, 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 oh," a phrase he never used. Lean's unease deepened. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she tried to make sense of what was happening. That's when she heard it, the faint sound of piano keys. She turned to the room and froze. The piano lid was up, and single keys were being pressed, one by one, playing a slow, haunting melody. She stood there, unable to move. There was no one else in the house. That was enough. Lean bolted up the stairs, her bare feet pounding on the old wooden steps, and ran straight to her car. She could still hear Nibbles screeching in distress from below, but she didn't go back for him. The primal urge to escape was overwhelming, and she drove away as fast as she could. As she sped down the hill, Lean glanced in her rearview mirror. Her front door, which she'd left wide open, slammed shut on its own. The curtains in her front window, curtains she had never bothered to close, were now drawn tight. Her heart skipped a beat. Her hands trembled on the wheel as she gripped it tightly, not daring to look back. She didn't stop until she reached her neighbor's house, a half-mile down the road. She knocked on the door, using the excuse of a broken air conditioner to beg for a place to stay. The neighbor, clearly annoyed at being woken up, grudgingly let her in. But Lean didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she returned to her house. Everything seemed calm, as if nothing had happened. Nibbles was alive and unharmed. The piano lid was still up, and the curtains remained tightly drawn. In the daylight, she moved Nibbles upstairs to the living room and made a decision. She would never sleep in the basement again, and she certainly wouldn't rent it out. The piano, too, was rarely touched from then on. Within a year, Lean had met a wonderful man and moved in with him. She never directly connected her hasty decision to leave the house to that night, but her friends couldn't help but suspect it played a role. As for the house, Lean sold it to a young couple. A year later, it was back on the market. When asked about what happened, Lean gives a practical answer. It was probably just a person, maybe a burglar or a squatter. But to those who know her well, she admits the truth in hushed tones. It wasn't a person. It was a ghost. All my life, I've encountered things that can't be explained. Ghostly whispers, strange movements, and odd sensations have always been a part of my reality. But one experience from my childhood stands out more than the rest. It happened at an old house, one known around town for being haunted. Strange noises, objects that moved on their own, sudden cold spots, and foul smells were a part of everyday life. My childhood was filled with fear and confusion. My parents weren't religious, but I learned how to pray quickly enough. If anything, it felt like a necessary survival skill. To make matters worse, my bedroom seemed to be the epicenter of the activity. This particular experience took place on a warm summer night when I was home alone. My family had been at a neighbor's barbecue across the street. While the other kids played in the yard, I suddenly craved a popsicle. I knew we had some at home, so I made the short trip back, confident that nothing could go wrong. Our neighborhood was quiet, safe even, and we never lock our doors. I went upstairs to the kitchen to grab my snack. The upstairs always felt calm and welcoming, a sanctuary of sorts. But after finishing my popsicle, I realized I needed to use the bathroom. For some reason, I didn't want to go at the neighbor's house. I didn't think twice. I just knew I had to go home. The bathroom in the basement was the only one available, and the thought of descending those stairs alone made my heart skip a beat. The hallway on the lower floor always terrified me. The open doorways to my parents' room, my sister's room, and worst of all, my own bedroom loomed like dark portals. Even in the daytime, those rooms were a constant source of dread, but I steeled myself, took a deep breath, and walked quickly, my eyes fixed straight ahead to avoid looking into any of the rooms. After using the brightly lit bathroom, I dreaded the walk back through the dark hallway. I briefly considered leaving the bathroom light on, but then I remembered my mother's constant reminders about wasting electricity. So I turned it off with a sigh and slowly started back. A strange feeling gripped me as I walked. It was as if something wasn't right, but I couldn't place it. I tried to brush it off. I reached my parents' bedroom door, the last obstacle before the stairs, and just as relief washed over me, I froze. That's when I saw it. Standing just outside the ground floor window, staring directly at me, was something I can't even begin to explain. The window was large enough for a man to crawl through, and beyond it was a pitch-black backyard that stretched into an empty field with no houses or lights for miles. At first, I thought it was a large bull, its massive black body gleaming in the dim light. But it wasn't just a bull. It was something else, something far worse. It seemed intelligent, aware. There was an eerie orange glow that surrounded it, though I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Its horns stretched wide above its head, and it crouched low, like it was preparing to charge. But it didn't move. It just stared at me. Its eyes were black, gleaming with an unnatural malice that sent a cold chill down my spine. I couldn't tear my gaze away. My heart thudded in my chest, and it felt like something was pulling me closer, like it had a hold on me. With each step, I moved closer to the window, unable to resist its pull. Its outline faded the closer I got, but still, I couldn't look away. Deep down, I knew it was pure evil. Just as I reached the window, I heard a voice. A woman's voice. It was firm, calm, and reassuring. The sound broke the trance I was in, and suddenly I was back in the doorway, fully aware of where I was. I could still feel that thing's presence, but I didn't dare look at it again. There was something behind me, something warm and protective, a presence that radiated safety and strength. The voice spoke again. "Turn around. Do not run. Just turn around and walk away." I didn't hesitate. I obeyed without question. I turned around and began walking toward the door that led outside. Just as I reached it, the voice whispered one final word. "Run." I didn't need to be told twice. That night, I stayed at the neighbor's house, too shaken to return home. I didn't go back until the next morning. To this day, I still have no idea what that creature was or why it appeared to me. I don't know what would have happened if the voice hadn't intervened. I've always believed that voice came from an angel, sent to protect me from something truly evil. The memory of that night is still vivid in my mind. It sounds unbelievable, even to me sometimes. But I swear, on everything I hold dear, that this story is true. This is the true story of my Aunt Lucia, someone I've always deeply admired, even though I never really got to know her. I was only 8 years old when she passed away, but the stories my mom has told me about her have always fascinated me. Lucia was the oldest of my mom's 7 siblings, 3 girls and 4 boys, and as everyone says, she was the most unique of them all. Lucia had a special connection to the supernatural from a very young age. She loved reading about ghosts and the paranormal, and unlike most people, she wasn't afraid of them. In fact, she found peace in places that others might avoid. She would often visit the local cemetery to read or just spend time there, saying it made her feel calm and at ease in its quiet embrace. But Lucia's fascination wasn't just academic. She had the ability to see and communicate with spirits. Since she was a little girl, Lucia spoke about a ghostly blonde girl in a white dress, always holding a small white box. The girl never spoke, only gazed at Lucia, and occasionally smiled. I remember hearing about an incident when Lucia was around 11 or 12. She rushed into the house one afternoon, telling everyone that the girl with the white box had appeared in their backyard. The children, curious and eager to see, ran outside, but as soon as they did, a bus came speeding around the corner and crashed right at the spot where they had been standing just moments earlier. If they had stayed even a few seconds longer, they would have been caught in the crash. Naturally, when they went inside, the ghostly girl had vanished. To this day, I can't help but wonder if that girl was a guardian spirit or just a benevolent presence. What was the significance of the box? As Lucia and her friends grew older, they often spent weekends at a friend's farmhouse. One weekend, they decided to go for a walk through the woods. There were 5 of them, including my mom, Lucia, and 3 others. While the group ran ahead, Lucia lingered behind, trying to knock an apple from a tree with a stick. When the apple fell, Lucia bent over to pick it up, but a hand reached down and grabbed it first. She looked up to see the blonde girl laughing and holding the apple. The girl tossed it to the ground before running away. Lucia reached for the apple again, but as soon as she touched it, the apple disappeared into thin air. Feeling uneasy, she hurried to catch up with the others. It was getting darker, and they still had to pass an old abandoned house by the railroad tracks, one that everyone knew was haunted. My mom, in particular, was terrified of the place, and just the thought of passing it at night made everyone uneasy. As they neared the house, they saw an old woman approaching. She had long white hair and wore ragged clothing. The woman was moving slowly, and as she passed them, they made a horrifying realization. She had no feet. She was floating, her head lowered as if hiding her face, and she let out a deep, moaning sound. My mom and the others panicked and began to run, but Lucia, always the curious one, decided to look back. The moment she did, the woman turned and locked eyes with her. Her eyes glowed a fiery red, like burning embers. It was only then that Lucia ran, her heart racing in terror. Years later, after Lucia married and had children, something extraordinary happened following the death of her mother. My cousin, who was very close to my grandmother, was only 4 when my grandmother passed away. That same week, my cousin fell terribly ill, running at high fever and crying endlessly. One night, Lucia went to the kitchen to fetch her daughter's medicine, but just as she was about to leave the room, she heard her daughter stop crying and begin to laugh instead. Surprised, Lucia hurried to her daughter's room, only to find my grandmother standing in the doorway. Her expression was blank and distant, her eyes unseeing, as if she was looking right through Lucia. Without a word, my grandmother turned and disappeared into the room. Lucia followed her, but by the time she reached the room, my grandmother was gone. Miraculously, my cousin's fever had disappeared, and she was completely healthy again. There are so many other stories about my Aunt Lucia, each one as captivating and mysterious as the last. I often wish I could have had the chance to speak with her and learn more about her supernatural encounters. Unfortunately, in 1980, Lucia succumbed to cancer at the young age of 40. Even though I was too young to fully understand the extraordinary experiences she had, I carry her memory with me, and I know her stories will live on forever, as incredible as they were. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It was a chilly fall evening, right around the time I had just started my freshman year of high school. My understanding of anything beyond the physical world was still vague at best. I had a friend named Sarah, who had faced her fair share of hardships in life, things that made me feel guilty for even thinking about complaining about my own family struggles. One afternoon, I noticed she looked especially pale. Her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, and she seemed off, shaky, and nervous. I asked her what was going on, and she finally opened up about something strange that had been happening at her house. It all started with her little brother, Mark, who was only in kindergarten at the time. He'd been playing video games one evening when something unseen yanked his shirt up over his head, scratching his back in a way that made it look like claws had torn into him. But it wasn't just him. Sarah described how she felt something breathing down her neck while she was trying to sleep, sometimes even while she was in the shower. Her other siblings, too, had all experienced something eerie in the house, and soon enough, they couldn't bear to sleep in their own rooms. They all started gathering in the living room every night, too scared to sleep alone. But here's the weird part. Nothing ever seemed to happen to their parents. One afternoon after school, Sarah asked me if I could make a homemade Ouija board. She was desperate for answers, and I agreed. When I brought it over, their parents were out, so we went inside. We set it up in the living room and tried to use it, but we could barely get any reaction. The air was thick with tension, and despite our best efforts, the atmosphere felt wrong. Eventually, Sarah led me into the game room, the place she said this presence seemed to haunt the most. I went in first, with Sarah clinging to my back. The room didn't have a door, just a heavy curtain that separated it from the rest of the house. But the moment I stepped inside, something pushed me back. I wasn't sure if it was an invisible hand or something else, but I was yanked back a bit. The smell hit me next, a rotting, decaying stench, like something had died there just days ago. It was overpowering, so nauseating I almost couldn't breathe. The air itself felt thick with anger, like the whole room was seething with rage. I felt a sharp, invisible slap across my face, a sensation so real I had to shake it off. Panicked, Sarah and I rushed back into the living room, hearts racing. I could feel my hands trembling. Later, Sarah told me she had seen something dark moving in the corner of that room, but I hadn't seen anything. We didn't know what else to do, but we found the courage to go back into the game room. This time, the oppressive feeling had faded, but the smell lingered, still faint but unmistakable, like some kind of residue left behind. In the weeks that followed, Sarah said the encounters seemed to stop, eventually disappearing entirely. The only explanation she could offer was a distant relative who had passed away under very mysterious circumstances. Months later, I moved into my own place. It was January, and I was helping my sister care for her young son and 3 stepdaughters. At first, everything seemed fine, but there was one strange thing that I couldn't shake, the feeling that someone was watching me from the stairs as I sat in the TV room. It happened when I was alone, and at first, I thought I was just imagining it. But then, one night, I was sitting there when I saw my youngest niece run across the hallway at the top of the stairs. I called out to her, but when she entered the room from the other side of the house, I realized the girl I had seen wasn't her. A month ago, I took my brother-in-law to the airport. As we were talking, he casually mentioned that he'd been experiencing sleep paralysis, what people around here sometimes call old hag episodes. He seemed embarrassed by it, but I couldn't help mentioning how some believe these things happen more often in houses with strange histories. To my surprise, he nodded, then said, "But our house isn't haunted." Well, maybe it is. Before you moved in, the girls and the baby stayed in the living room one night while Chris was at work. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. I turned around to see who it was, but then I realized the girls were all asleep in front of me. In that moment, I felt like time had slowed down. The world seemed a little out of sync, and I couldn't help but wonder, what is really happening when no one's watching? When I was about 12 or 13, I lived with my parents in a 2-story house on the edge of a quiet town called Pine Lake. The house was old, one of those places with creaky floorboards and windows that rattled in the wind. We had a basement apartment where we set up our living area, and upstairs, the 3 bedrooms on the first floor were split between my 2 brothers and me. My room, the largest, faced the street. It had 2 big closets with heavy wooden sliding doors, one by my door, which was mine, and the other across the room for my mother's out-of-season clothes. To this day, I still call it the bad closet. It was a Sunday afternoon when I first noticed something strange. I was sitting on my bed reading when I heard a scratching sound. It was slow and rhythmic, almost like something was trying to get my attention. At first, I looked up. The moment I did, the sound stopped. I went back to my book, but then it started again, louder this time. I got up, thinking maybe my brother was messing with me, but the sound grew more persistent, like someone was tapping on the wall from inside. I couldn't ignore it, so I went to investigate. I walked out into the hallway and tried my brother's room, hoping to catch him in the act. But when I opened the door, no one was there. My heart started racing, and I went back to my room, shutting the door behind me. Just as I sat back down, the scratching began again. Nervous now, I ran downstairs to where my dad and younger brother were watching a football game, and my mom was in the kitchen. I didn't mention the noise to them. I was too scared. Instead, I asked about my oldest brother. My mom told me he was at the movies. That was when I started to feel something wasn't right. I made my way back upstairs, and as soon as I closed my door behind me, the scratching started again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was drawing me to it, something I needed to figure out. It was like a twisted game of hot and cold. As I moved around the room, following the noise, as I neared the closet farthest from the door, the scratching grew so loud, it was almost unbearable. And that's when I realized the sound was coming from right behind the wooden closet door. Panicked, I ran out of the room and up to my grandparents' house, which was just above ours. My grandfather was always the one who seemed to know what to do. As we walked back downstairs, my heart raced in my chest. I didn't know what we would find when we opened that closet, but I knew it wouldn't be good. When we arrived at my room, my grandfather didn't hesitate. He walked straight up to the closet and slid the heavy door open. Inside, the closet was mostly empty, with just a few winter coats hanging on the side and a pile of wire hangers. He shook the hangers around to make sure nothing was hiding, but it was clear nothing was there. "There's nothing in here, kiddo," he said, his voice calm, trying to reassure me. Probably just a mouse or something, but I wasn't convinced. I shook my head, telling him the sound didn't come from the bottom of the door. It came from the top, just above where the wood slid open. He shrugged it off, suggesting it was just the vibration from passing trucks outside. But I knew that wasn't it. After he left, I watched him head back upstairs, and as soon as the door shut behind him, the scratching started again. This time louder, like something was pounding on the door. I screamed, "I'm not afraid of you," and bolted downstairs to my parents' apartment, too terrified to speak about what I had just seen. That night, I don't know how I managed to sleep in that room, but somehow I did. From then on, I couldn't shake my fear of that closet. I avoided it, never going near it after dark. Some nights, the fear would grip me so tightly it wouldn't let go until the early hours of the morning. I had other unsettling experiences, some that felt like dreams, others that didn't. As the years passed, the fear stayed with me, especially when I visited my parents after I had moved out. Every time I walked past that room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in that closet. A Wiccan friend of mine once told me there was a portal in that closet, a tear between worlds. She believed I was sensitive to psychic energy, which is why the presence remained there. She even performed 2 rituals to cleanse the space, hoping to seal whatever had been hiding. But even after her efforts, I still feel it, dormant but present. Even now, when I visit my parents' house, I can't shake the feeling that something is waiting for me in that closet, watching, biding its time. When I think back to 6 years ago, my sons and I had just relocated to a small town in central Oregon after a tough divorce. We found an apartment in a neighborhood that was slowly beginning to change. It was a quiet area, filled with kind-hearted people, and the apartment itself was simple and affordable. We felt lucky to have found it. One of the families on our block was the Rivers family, Sharon, a warm and welcoming woman, and her 2 daughters. We quickly became close, spending time together often and helping each other out whenever we could. After 2 years, we decided to move to a bigger town, Eugene, but our hearts always lingered on our old neighborhood, so we made regular visits. Sometimes we stayed at a nearby motel, but often we would stay with Sharon and her daughters, enjoying the comfort of familiar faces and places. One night, during one of these visits, something happened that I'll never forget. It was around midnight, maybe a little after 12 o'clock a.m., when my oldest son, Ben, who was 7 at the time, woke me up, crying softly. "Make it stop, Mom. Make it stop. It's so loud," he whispered frantically. I sat up quickly, confused and concerned. Ben was sitting on the edge of the bed, hands pressed over his ears, staring at the wall that faced the old wooded forest outside the house. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, my voice laced with concern. He pointed to the wall, his face pale. "The train, Mom. It's so loud. How did it get inside?" he said, looking genuinely frightened. I hadn't heard anything. "What train?" I asked again, still unsure of what was going on. Ben's eyes were wide with panic as he described the train in detail. "It's old, and there's white smoke coming from the top. The train is black, and there are people on it. Men and women with hats, like the old-fashioned kind. And there were children with rosy cheeks, waving at me. They looked so happy." I listened closely as he continued, his voice full of wonder and fear. "There's a man in a black uniform with a hat, and he's holding something bright. He's waving at me, Mom. Wave back. He's waving at us." A chill ran down my spine as I realized he wasn't making this up. I couldn't see the train, but I knew my son wasn't lying. "A lantern?" I asked softly, trying to make sense of it. "Yes, a lantern," Ben said with excitement, his fear slowly turning into awe. "Look, Mom, he's waving at us. Wave back." Though I felt a little uneasy, I couldn't deny that there was something strange about the whole situation. Hesitant, I waved back at the wall, even though I couldn't see what he saw. The air felt heavy in the room, as though something beyond our understanding was just out of reach. I could feel it in my bones. Whatever Ben was witnessing, it was real to him. As I sat there, watching my son, something inside me told me that he wasn't just dreaming. He was seeing something otherworldly. It was as if the spirits of long-forgotten travelers were reaching out to him, sharing a glimpse of their journey, and for some reason, they had chosen him as their witness. To this day, Ben, now 13, still occasionally asks me, "Where do you think that train was going? Those people looked so happy, like they were on their way to something good." He always looks at me earnestly and asks, "Mom, you believe me, don't you? I really saw it. I remember it." And I tell him, "Yes, Ben, I remember. You weren't dreaming. You saw something real. A ghost train, just like you said." A few weeks after the incident, I decided to take Ben to the local library. While browsing through some old photographs, he pointed at one of a steam engine from the early 1900s. "That's it," he said, excited. "Those people were dressed just like that." At the library, we discovered that the old neighborhood where we had lived was once home to a train depot that had been demolished in the 1950s. It seemed that Ben had seen a piece of history, a ghostly train that was forever tied to the past. The whole experience left both of us in awe, more attuned to the possibility that spirits and memories from another time might be lingering around us, even if we couldn't see them. The train, with its strange passengers and the lantern-bearing man, had left an impression on me, one that I couldn't shake. It was a reminder that sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. It can come back to visit us when we least expect it. It was the spring of 1967, and the rain had been relentless for nearly 3 days straight, the kind of heavy, drenching rain that seemed to swallow up the world, leaving everything soaked and silent. It was just before twilight, the skies still heavy with clouds, when it happened. My dad was working late, like he often did, and it was just my mom, my 2 sisters, my 3 brothers, and me, home alone. One of my sisters, Lisa, was 14 at the time. She had scoliosis, which made her back curve in such a way that walking, let alone running, was difficult for her. I don't remember exactly what we were doing that night, but I do recall that we were sitting around, telling ghost stories. It had become our ritual during stormy evenings, telling stories about haunted places and things that went bump in the night. I think Mom was on the back porch, laundry basket in hand, as usual, washing clothes by the old, creaky utility sink. Everything felt normal. Just another quiet evening in our house. Then, without warning, a loud crash echoed through the house. The kind of sound that made your stomach drop. The front door slammed open, not slowly, but as though someone had kicked it in. Someone we didn't know, and never would. Mom screamed for us to run, out the back door, across the muddy yard, and up to my grandparents' house. The rain had turned our backyard into nothing but a vast, slippery puddle of mud. But we didn't hesitate. We bolted as fast as we could, feet slipping, hearts racing, the noise of the storm all around us. By the time we reached my grandparents' house, we were covered in mud from head to toe. Not a single one of us had shoes on, and we were a mess, drenched, filthy, and terrified. Grandma, seeing us in such a state, rushed to grab towels. She handed one to each of us, tutting and shaking her head at the mess we made. But when she went to give Lisa her towel, everything stopped. Grandma froze, her eyes wide, staring at Lisa in a way I hadn't seen before. The rest of us turned, trying to figure out what had happened. And then we saw it. Lisa, who had been so scared she could barely breathe, was barely wet at all. No mud on her clothes, no rainwater soaking her skin, not even a trace on the soles of her bare feet. How was that possible? How did she reach the house without getting soaked like the rest of us? We all stood there in silence, trying to make sense of it. Then, slowly, the only explanation we could come up with started to form. It said that everyone has a guardian angel, a protector, someone who watches over us until our time comes. And we believed that, at that moment, Lisa's guardian angel had seen what was happening. Knowing she couldn't keep up with the rest of us, that she couldn't run fast enough to escape whatever threat was out there, her angel must have carried her. The angel must have shielded her from the rain, from the mud, keeping her safe as we rushed for safety. The next morning, we went back to the house, still shaken from the night. The door was still wide open, but there was no sign of the intruder. Whoever had kicked it in had never come inside. They'd just run off. Across the road, down the embankment, across another street, and then disappeared into the woods. It didn't make sense, but the strangest part was what we found the next day. There was a large, muddy footprint right on the front door, just one, and faint prints, leading away from the porch, through the yard, across the road, and into the woods. Whoever had come that night hadn't just kicked the door open. They had left a trace, a strange mark on the night that we could never explain. Lisa passed away in 1974, at the age of 24, but the memory of that night stayed with me. It stayed with all of us. What happened that evening, what protected her, still lingers in my mind. Was it her guardian angel, as we believed, or was there something else watching over her that night? I worked as a housekeeper for a wonderful family in a small town called Pine Lake. It was a peaceful place with charming homes, nestled near the quiet banks of a lake. The job was a dream, and I truly loved it. The family had a beautiful house with a picturesque view, and they also owned a vacation home in Florida. My responsibility included caring for both homes when they were away. At first, my time there felt entirely normal, but over the years, strange feelings started to creep in. I could feel it most when the lady of the house, Mrs. Griggs, was gone for her trips. It wasn't anything I could see, but there was an unsettling sense of being watched. Sometimes it felt so overwhelming that I'd leave early, or on the really bad days, I'd ask someone to come with me. When I was alone, I would even speak out loud, as though addressing whatever presence was in the house, explaining what I was doing and why I was there. Curious if I was just imagining things, I spoke with my aunt, who had worked for the Griggs family before me. I asked if she'd ever felt anything unusual. She told me that she had always felt safe and at ease in the house, but she mentioned something I hadn't known before. Mrs. Griggs had lost her daughter in a car accident when she was just 16. My aunt also recalled hearing eerie stories from a previous housekeeper, though she had dismissed them, never believing in such things. I laughed it off too, telling myself it was just my imagination. When Mrs. Griggs was home, things were always easier. She was there most of the time when I worked, and her presence brought comfort. But then, one afternoon, everything changed. I was cleaning the sunroom, my favorite place in the house. I loved the bright, airy space that overlooked the lake. It was one of those overcast days, the kind that might bring rain, but I felt calm because Mrs. Griggs was there. I was humming to myself as I dusted, content with the peaceful routine. Suddenly, I felt a sharp chill in the air, so cold it sent a shiver up my spine. And then, I heard it, soft laughter. It was so faint at first that I thought I might be imagining it. But then, one of the large houseplants near the window began to shake. as if a gust of wind had swept through the room. I froze in place. Then, one by one, all the plants started to tremble in unison, the leaves fluttering like they were caught in a storm. My heart pounded in my chest, and I screamed. Mrs. Griggs came rushing from the hallway, following the sound of my panic. As she entered the room, the plants immediately stopped shaking. She only saw one plant swaying gently and looked at me